Have you ever wondered about the civilization that ruled Italy before the Romans ever dreamed of empire? A people so mysterious that for centuries scholars believed they had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only tantalizing clues carved in stone and painted on tomb walls. Well, there was such a civilization, and their story is far more incredible than you might imagine. The Etruscans were the forgotten masters of ancient Italy, a sophisticated people who built magnificent cities, created breathtaking art, and established a civilization that would profoundly influence the very Romans who eventually conquered them. Until recently, these remarkable people were effectively lost to history, known only through scattered references in ancient texts and mysterious inscriptions that scholars struggled to decipher. What makes the Etruscan story so compelling is not just their remarkable achievements, but the fact that they were hiding in plain sight for over 1,000 years. Their tombs dotted the Italian countryside, their artifacts filled museum collections, and their influence shaped Roman culture in ways that echoed through the centuries. Yet somehow, the true extent of their civilization remained shrouded in mystery. In this video, we're going to uncover the fascinating world of the Etruscans and explore how a civilization that once dominated the Italian peninsula came to be forgotten by history. We'll discover their origins, examine their remarkable society, and reveal how their legacy lived on long after their cities fell to Roman conquest. But first, let me share something that will absolutely blow your mind about just how advanced these people really were. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed that the Etruscans weren't just another ancient civilization struggling to survive in a harsh world. They were technological innovators who mastered metallurgy to a degree that rivaled anything in the ancient Mediterranean. They created art so beautiful that it influenced Greek masters. They established trade networks that stretched across the known world. And perhaps most remarkably of all, they built a society where women enjoyed freedoms that wouldn't be seen again in Europe for over 1,000 years. The picture that emerges from decades of archaeological investigation is that of a civilization far more sophisticated than most people realize. These weren't primitive tribes scratching out a living in central Italy. The Etruscans built sprawling cities with advanced engineering, created religious systems of stunning complexity, and established political institutions that would directly influence the development of the Roman Republic. So, who exactly were the Etruscans? And how did such an advanced civilization come to be virtually erased from popular memory? To answer that question, we need to start at the very beginning, in the mists of prehistory, when the Italian peninsula was home to numerous tribes and peoples, each vying for control of this fertile and strategically important land. The origins of the Etruscans have been debated for over 2,000 years, with ancient historians themselves disagreeing about where these people came from. The Greek historian Herodotus claimed they migrated from Lydia in Asia Minor, driven by famine, to seek new lands across the sea. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, writing centuries later, argued they were indigenous to Italy, descendants of earlier peoples who had inhabited the region for generations. This debate raged among scholars for centuries, with passionate arguments on both sides. Some pointed to similarities between Etruscan culture and that of the Eastern Mediterranean as evidence of migration. Others noted the clear continuity between earlier Iron Age cultures in Italy and the emergence of Etruscan civilization. The mystery seemed unsolvable, destined to remain one of archaeology's great unanswered questions. Then modern science stepped in with a definitive answer. Recent genetic studies have finally resolved this ancient debate once and for all. DNA analysis of Etruscan remains has revealed that these people were indeed indigenous to Italy, sharing genetic profiles with their Latin neighbours who would eventually found Rome. The evidence is clear and compelling. The Etruscans were not mysterious migrants from distant lands, but rather the descendants of local Bronze Age populations who had inhabited central Italy for generations. This genetic evidence aligns perfectly with what archaeologists have been discovering about the development of Etruscan culture. The earliest identifiably Etruscan culture, known as the Villanovan culture, emerged around 900 BCE from earlier Bronze Age traditions in the same region. There was no sudden appearance of a foreign people, no mass migration that transformed the cultural landscape overnight. Instead, we see a gradual evolution of local traditions into the sophisticated civilization that would become known as Etruscan. But understanding their origins is just the beginning of the Etruscan story. What really sets these people apart is not where they came from, but what they accomplished once they established themselves as the dominant power in central Italy. By the 8th century BCE, Etruscan civilization was flourishing across a vast territory that encompassed much of what is now modern Tuscany, western Umbria, northern Lazio, and parts of the Po Valley. This wasn't a unified empire in the way we might think of later Roman conquests. Instead, the Etruscans organized themselves into a federation of independent city-states, each ruling its own territory while sharing common cultural and religious practices. The most prominent of these cities included Tarquinia, Veii, Cerveteri, Vulci, and Clusium, each a major power in its own right with its own distinct character and specializations. The political structure of these city-states was sophisticated and evolved over time. Early Etruscan cities were ruled by kings called lucumones, who served not just as political leaders but as high priests connecting the human and divine realms. These monarchs wielded considerable power, but they were not absolute despots. They governed through complex networks of aristocratic families and religious institutions that provided checks on their authority. As Etruscan civilization matured, many cities transitioned from monarchy to oligarchic republics, with power shared among the wealthy elite families who controlled trade, land, and religious offices. This political evolution paralleled similar developments in contemporary Greek city-states and would later influence the Roman Republic's own governmental structures. What made the Etruscan Federation unique was its balance between independence and cooperation. Each city maintained its sovereignty, conducting its own foreign policy, waging its own wars, and managing its own internal affairs. Yet they were bound together by shared religious practices, similar languages and dialects, and a common cultural identity that distinguished them from neighboring peoples. The Federation held annual assemblies at sacred sites where representatives from the various cities would gather to discuss matters of mutual concern, select religious officials, and coordinate responses to external threats. These meetings weren't just political gatherings, but religious festivals that reinforced the bonds holding Etruscan civilization together. This decentralized system had both advantages and disadvantages. On the positive side, it allowed for remarkable cultural diversity and innovation as different cities specialized in various crafts and developed their own artistic traditions. Chiusi became famous for its stone sculpture and bronze work. Populonia emerged as one of the Mediterranean's premier iron-producing centers. Tarquinia developed renowned linen production. Vulci housed workshops that produced everything from painted pottery to intricate ivory carvings. The diversity of specialization created a robust internal economy where cities traded their products throughout the Etruscan world. A bronze vessel crafted in Vulci might end up in a tomb in Tarquinia. Linen produced in one city could be fashioned into garments worn by aristocrats hundreds of miles away. This internal trade network helped bind the Federation together economically while encouraging innovation and artistic development. However, the decentralized nature of Etruscan political organization also created vulnerabilities that would eventually contribute to their downfall. When external threats emerged, particularly the rising power of Rome, the Etruscan cities often struggled to coordinate effective responses. Individual cities might form alliances or seek separate peace treaties, undermining collective resistance to foreign conquest. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we examine the Etruscan decline, We need to understand what made their civilization so remarkable at its peak. And nowhere is their sophistication more evident than in their religious beliefs and practices, which formed the foundation of Etruscan society and influenced everything from art and architecture to politics and daily life. Etruscan religion was a complex polytheistic system that saw divine power manifested in every aspect of the natural world. Unlike many ancient peoples who viewed their gods as distant beings, occasionally intervening in human affairs, the Etruscans believed in intimate and constant contact with the divine realm. They did nothing of importance without consulting the gods and interpreting their will through sophisticated divination practices. The Etruscans believed their religious knowledge had been revealed to them by supernatural beings, particularly a childlike figure named Tages, who emerged from freshly ploughed earth, already gifted with divine wisdom, and Vagoia, a female prophet who taught them the sacred laws governing land boundaries and religious observances. These revelations form the foundation of Etruscan religious practice and were carefully preserved by generations of priests. Central to Etruscan religious practice was the art of divination, particularly haruspicy, the examination of sacrificed animals' entrails to divine the will of the gods. This wasn't a crude or primitive practice, but a sophisticated science requiring years of training and deep understanding of cosmological principles. Etruscan priests, known as haruspices, were renowned throughout the ancient Mediterranean for their skill, and even Romans regularly consulted them on matters of state importance. The famous bronze liver found at Piacenza provides fascinating insight into the complexity of Etruscan divination. This artifact, used for training haruspices, divides the liver into numerous sections corresponding to different deities and celestial regions. By examining the condition of each section in a sacrificial victim, priests could interpret messages from specific gods and predict future events with remarkable precision. This connection between earthly signs and divine will extend beyond animal sacrifice to include augury, the interpretation of bird flight patterns and lightning strikes. Etruscan priests mapped the sky into sacred regions, each governed by different deities, and could read divine messages in the movement of birds across these celestial boundaries or the direction and intensity of lightning bolts during storms. What made Etruscan religion particularly fascinating was its inclusive nature. As their territory expanded and they encountered other peoples, the Etruscans regularly adopted foreign deities into their pantheon, either merging them with existing gods through syncretism, or simply adding them wholesale to their divine family. This wasn't seen as religious confusion, but as practical wisdom, ensuring that no deity would feel slighted and potentially turn against the Etruscan people. This approach to religion reflected the Etruscan worldview more broadly. They were a practical people who believed in covering all their bases, whether in matters of commerce, politics, or divine favour. If adopting a foreign god might bring additional protection or prosperity, why not do so? This pragmatic flexibility would become one of their defining characteristics and would later influence Roman religious practices as well. The religious calendar that governed Etruscan life was incredibly complex, with over 100 festivals celebrated annually throughout their territory. These weren't just solemn religious observances, but joyous community celebrations featuring music, dancing, athletic competitions, and elaborate feasts. The festivals served multiple purposes, honouring the gods, reinforcing social bonds, displaying wealth and status, and providing entertainment for people from all social classes. Coming up next on Obscure Histories, we'll dive deep into the remarkable society that emerged from these religious foundations, exploring how Etruscan cities were organised, what daily life was like for people at different social levels, and discovering the revolutionary status that Etruscan women enjoyed in a world where female freedom was virtually unknown. We'll also examine the incredible artistic achievements that made Etruscan culture legendary throughout the ancient world, and reveal how their innovations in metallurgy and craftsmanship established trade networks spanning the entire Mediterranean. The religious festivals that punctuated Etruscan life were spectacles that would have amazed visitors from across the Mediterranean. Picture this: entire cities transformed into stages for elaborate celebrations where the boundaries between sacred and secular, between worship and entertainment, completely dissolved. Musicians played harps and lyres while dancers moved in intricate patterns that told stories of gods and heroes. Athletes competed in boxing matches and wrestling contests, their victories seen as offerings to divine patrons. And everywhere, the aroma of sacrificial feasts filled the air as entire communities gathered to share meals that connected them with their ancestors and their gods. But what truly set Etruscan society apart wasn't just their religious practices, revolutionary as they were. It was the remarkable social structure they built around these beliefs, a civilization that challenged every assumption about how ancient societies were supposed to work. And nowhere is this more evident than in the status they granted to women, something so extraordinary that it scandalized their Greek and Roman neighbors for centuries. Etruscan women enjoyed freedoms that were virtually unheard of in the ancient world. While Greek women were confined to their homes, and Roman women remained under the legal authority of male relatives throughout their lives, Etruscan women participated fully in public life. They attended banquets alongside their husbands, reclining on dining couches and drinking wine in mixed company, a practice that shocked foreign observers who considered such behavior scandalous and immoral. The archaeological evidence for women's elevated status is overwhelming and undeniable. Tomb inscriptions frequently record women's names alongside their accomplishments, treating them as individuals worthy of remembrance rather than mere appendages to their male relatives. Women retained their family names after marriage, could own property independently, and participated actively in religious ceremonies as priestesses and ritual specialists. The famous sarcophagus of the spouses from Cerveteri shows a married couple reclining together as equals, their poses and expressions conveying mutual affection and respect. This wasn't just theoretical equality either. Etruscan women wielded real economic and political influence. They managed businesses, participated in trade networks, and accumulated wealth in their own right. Some of the richest tombs discovered by archaeologists belong to women, filled with luxury goods that demonstrate their access to resources and their importance in Etruscan society. The Regalini Galassi tomb, one of the most spectacular discoveries in Etruscan archaeology, contained the burial of a woman surrounded by gold jewelry, silver vessels, and imported luxury items that would have cost fortunes. The contrast with neighboring societies couldn't have been more stark. Greek writers like Theopompus wrote scandalous accounts of Etruscan women's behavior, describing their freedom to socialize with men as evidence of moral corruption. Roman authors expressed similar shock at Etruscan marriage customs and women's public roles. What these foreign critics failed to understand was that Etruscan society had developed along fundamentally different lines, creating space for women to flourish in ways that would remain impossible elsewhere for centuries to come. This social revolution extended throughout Etruscan society in ways that created a remarkably sophisticated urban civilization. Etruscan cities were marvels of ancient engineering and planning, with sophisticated drainage systems, paved streets, and public spaces designed for both commerce and ceremony. The city of Veii, for example, featured an extensive tunnel system that channeled water throughout the urban area, demonstrating engineering skills that rivaled anything built by Greeks or Romans. The social hierarchy that emerged in these cities was complex, but allowed for considerable mobility. At the top stood the aristocratic families who controlled land, trade, and religious offices. These weren't just wealthy landowners, but entrepreneurs who invested in manufacturing, mining, and maritime commerce. Below them was a substantial middle class of craftsmen, merchants, and small farmers who enjoyed considerable prosperity during Etruscan civilization's peak years. What made Etruscan society particularly dynamic was the role of craftsmanship and artistic production in creating wealth and status. Unlike societies that valued only military prowess or land ownership, the Etruscans celebrated skilled artisans whose work brought prestige to their cities and attracted customers from across the Mediterranean. A master metalworker in Vulci or a renowned painter in Tarquinia could achieve wealth and recognition that elevated them far above their humble origins. The evidence for this celebration of craftsmanship is everywhere in Etruscan archaeological sites. Workshops have been discovered that were clearly centres of innovation and artistic excellence. The François tomb in Vulci, for instance, contains frescoes of such sophistication that they rival the best work produced anywhere in the ancient world. The technical mastery displayed in these paintings required not just individual talent, but entire schools of artists working together, sharing techniques, and pushing the boundaries of their medium. Etruscan metalworking achieved levels of excellence that amazed contemporary civilizations and still impresses experts today. Their bronze work incorporated techniques like granulation and repoussé that created objects of breathtaking beauty and technical complexity. The Chimera of Arezzo, discovered in the 16th century and now housed in Florence, demonstrates the pinnacle of Etruscan bronze casting. This mythical creature, with its lion's body, goat's head emerging from its back, and serpent tail, was created with such anatomical precision and artistic vision that it became an instant sensation among Renaissance collectors. But the Etruscans weren't just creating art for art's sake. Their metalworking expertise served intensely practical purposes that drove their economic expansion across the Mediterranean. The rich mineral deposits of central Italy provided them with copper, iron, silver, and lead in abundance, but it was their technological innovations in extraction and processing that transformed these raw materials into the foundation of Etruscan prosperity. The island of Elba, just off the Etruscan coast, contains some of the richest iron deposits in the ancient world. Etruscan engineers developed sophisticated techniques for mining and smelting that allowed them to produce iron in quantities that dwarfed anything achieved by their competitors. The city of Populonia became one of the Mediterranean's premier iron-producing centres, its forges working day and night to meet demand from across the ancient world. This industrial capacity gave the Etruscans enormous advantages in both warfare and commerce. Their weapons and armour were superior to anything produced by neighbouring peoples, giving Etruscan armies technological edges that helped them dominate central Italy for centuries. More importantly for long-term prosperity, their metalwork became luxury goods coveted by elites throughout the Mediterranean world. Etruscan bronze vessels, jewellery, and decorative objects have been found in archaeological sites from Spain to the Black Sea. Evidence of trade networks that connected Etruscan workshops with customers thousands of miles away. These weren't just random commercial exchanges, but systematic trading relationships that brought enormous wealth flowing into Etruscan cities and funded the artistic and architectural achievements that defined their civilization. The scale of Etruscan commercial activity was truly impressive. Ships loaded with Etruscan goods sailed regularly to Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily, to Phoenician trading posts in North Africa, and to Celtic settlements in modern France and Spain. They imported raw materials like amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, and precious stones from across the known world, transforming these materials in their workshops into finished products that commanded premium prices. This commercial success created a feedback loop that drove artistic and technological innovation. Wealthy customers demanded ever more sophisticated and beautiful objects, pushing Etruscan craftsmen to develop new techniques and explore new artistic possibilities. The result was a flowering of creativity that produced objects like the elaborate gold jewellery found in the Regalini Galassi tomb, or the intricate bronze mirrors decorated with mythological scenes that demonstrate both technical mastery and sophisticated artistic vision. The prosperity generated by this commercial and artistic success transformed Etruscan cities into urban centres that rivaled anything in the ancient world. Public buildings were constructed on massive scales, featuring the distinctive Etruscan architectural style with its high podiums, frontal staircases, and elaborate terracotta decorations. Private homes of the wealthy featured multiple rooms arranged around central courtyards, with sophisticated heating systems and elaborate decorative programs that displayed their owners' wealth and cultural sophistication. But perhaps most remarkably of all, this prosperity was not concentrated exclusively in the hands of a tiny elite. Archaeological evidence suggests that Etruscan society developed a substantial middle class that enjoyed access to luxury goods, artistic objects, and cultural experiences that would have been impossible for ordinary people in most ancient civilizations. Even relatively modest tombs contain imported pottery, bronze objects, and personal ornaments that indicate their owners participated meaningfully in the prosperity that Etruscan commercial success had created. This broad-based prosperity helps explain why Etruscan civilization proved so resilient and creative over several centuries. When wealth and opportunity were accessible to significant portions of the population, it created incentives for innovation, artistic experimentation, and cultural development that sustained Etruscan achievements across generations. It also helps explain why Etruscan influence proved so enduring, even after their political independence was lost to Roman conquest. But we're getting ahead of our story again. Before we examine how the Romans eventually absorbed Etruscan civilization, we need to understand the military traditions and political institutions that allowed the Etruscans to dominate central Italy for so long. Their success wasn't built only on commercial prosperity and artistic achievement, impressive as these were. The Etruscans were also formidable warriors whose military innovations would profoundly influence the development of Roman military tactics and help shape the future of Mediterranean warfare. And that's exactly what we'll explore next here on Obscure Historiesa, as we dive into the world of Etruscan warfare, examine their sophisticated military technology, and discover how their political institutions created the foundations that Rome would later build upon to construct its own empire. The Etruscan military system was built around innovations that would echo through centuries of Mediterranean warfare. Unlike their contemporaries who relied primarily on traditional Greek hoplite tactics, Etruscan commanders developed a unique approach that combined heavy infantry formations with extensive use of javelins and light troops in ways that maximized their tactical flexibility on the battlefield. What made Etruscan warfare distinctive was their extensive use of javelin barrages before the main battle lines engaged. While Greek and Persian armies typically kept their light troops separate from the primary phalanx formations, Etruscan forces integrated missile weapons directly into their main battle line. This created a devastating opening phase where opposing forces would exchange volleys of javelins designed to disrupt enemy formations before the decisive close-quarters combat began. The archaeological evidence for Etruscan military excellence is abundant and impressive. Wealthy warrior tombs consistently contain either actual weapons and armor or detailed sculptural representations of military equipment. The variety is remarkable, showing how Etruscan military technology evolved over time while maintaining distinctively Etruscan characteristics that set their equipment apart from Greek or Roman equivalents. Etruscan shields, for example, were traditionally circular bronze discs measuring roughly a yard across, decorated with intricate designs that served both protective and ceremonial purposes. Early examples were flat, but later versions developed a slight convex curve that provided better protection while maintaining the decorative elements that marked their owner's status and achievements. These shields bore close resemblance to contemporary Greek models, but incorporated distinctly Etruscan artistic motifs and manufacturing techniques. Perhaps most distinctive of all Etruscan military equipment were their helmets, particularly the famous crested helm variety that became virtually synonymous with Etruscan warriors. These helmets were fashioned by joining two embossed plates into a high-pointed crest that was frequently decorated with elaborate designs. The craftsmanship required to create these helmets demonstrates the sophisticated metallurgical skills that Etruscan armorers had developed, combining practical protection with artistic expression in ways that reflected the broader Etruscan approach to material culture. The evolution of Etruscan military equipment reveals their remarkable ability to adapt foreign innovations while maintaining their own cultural identity. They borrowed techniques and designs from Greek craftsmen, but transformed them through distinctly Etruscan artistic sensibilities and manufacturing processes. The result was military equipment that was both functionally superior and visually distinctive, allowing Etruscan warriors to be immediately recognizable on ancient battlefields. But Etruscan military success wasn't built solely on superior equipment. Their tactical innovations proved equally important in establishing their dominance over central Italy. The integration of javelin warfare into traditional phalanx combat created a combined arms approach that gave Etruscan commanders significant advantages over enemies who relied on more conventional tactics. The typical Etruscan army was organized around a core of citizen soldiers drawn from the middle classes of their cities. These men could afford the full panoply of hoplite equipment and formed the backbone of Etruscan military forces. They were supported by lighter-armed citizens equipped with spears, javelins, and mass-produced shields, but lacking the expensive bronze armor that characterized the heavy infantry. Surrounding this citizen corps were contingents of rural fighters drawn from the countryside around each city. These included young javelin men whose speed and agility made them ideal for harassment tactics, axemen recruited from forest communities who brought intimate knowledge of rough terrain, archers whose skills had been honed hunting in Etruscan forests, and slingers from pastoral communities who could deliver devastating, accurate fire at considerable ranges. The diversity of troop types available to Etruscan commanders gave them tactical flexibility that proved decisive in numerous campaigns. They could adapt their battle plans to different terrains and enemy forces, using light troops to harass opponents in broken ground, or concentrating their heavy infantry for decisive attacks on open battlefields. This adaptability became one of the hallmarks of Etruscan military doctrine and would later influence Roman tactical development. Etruscan cavalry also played important roles in their military system. Though like most ancient Mediterranean armies, mounted forces remained a relatively small component of their overall strength. Young nobles often served as scout cavalry, using their superior horses and equipment to gather intelligence and screen army movements. Their mobility made them invaluable for reconnaissance and pursuit operations that could turn tactical victories into strategic triumphs. The command structure of Etruscan armies reflected the political organization of their city-states. Kings or elected magistrates typically led their city's forces in person, emphasizing the connection between political authority and military leadership that characterized ancient warfare. When multiple cities cooperated in joint campaigns, they would select overall commanders based on military reputation and political standing within the Etruscan Federation. This decentralized command structure had both strengths and weaknesses that would become increasingly apparent as Etruscan civilization faced external pressures. On the positive side, it encouraged military innovation and tactical experimentation as different cities developed their own approaches to warfare. Commanders who achieved notable successes could share their techniques with allies, spreading effective innovations throughout the Etruscan military system. However, the lack of unified command also created coordination problems that became more serious as external threats intensified. Individual cities might pursue their own military objectives, even when broader Etruscan interests would have benefited from coordinated action. This tension between local autonomy and collective security would eventually contribute to Etruscan vulnerability against more centralized opponents. The seasonal nature of ancient warfare shaped Etruscan military campaigns just as it did for their contemporaries throughout the Mediterranean. Summer months were the traditional campaigning season when armies could move without being hampered by winter weather and when agricultural demands allowed men to leave their farms for extended periods. Etruscan forces used these campaigns not just for territorial expansion, but also for economic purposes, raiding neighboring territories to acquire valuable resources, prestige goods, and slaves. These military expeditions served multiple functions within Etruscan society beyond their immediate tactical objectives. Successful campaigns brought loot that could be distributed among the warriors, strengthening loyalty to military leaders and providing resources for public works projects that enhanced city prestige. Captured slaves provided labor for mining operations, agricultural estates, and craft workshops that drove Etruscan economic expansion. Military service also played important social functions, providing opportunities for young men to prove their courage and skill, while building the personal relationships that would shape their later careers in politics and commerce. Veterans of successful campaigns enjoyed elevated status within their communities, and military achievements often translated into political influence and commercial opportunities. The integration of warfare into broader Etruscan social and economic systems helps explain why their military traditions proved so enduring and influential. War wasn't seen as a separate sphere of activity, but as one component of a comprehensive approach to building and maintaining prosperous communities. This holistic view of military affairs would later influence Roman military organization and contribute to Rome's own expansion throughout the Mediterranean. Etruscan military engineering also demonstrated the technological sophistication that characterized their civilization more broadly. Their armies were supported by logistics systems that could maintain forces in the field for extended campaigns. They developed techniques for constructing field fortifications that protected their camps and supply lines during operations in hostile territory. Their siege warfare capabilities allowed them to reduce enemy strongholds that might otherwise have provided bases for continued resistance. The famous Etruscan expertise in divination played crucial roles in military planning and execution. Before major campaigns, haruspices would examine sacrificial victims to determine whether the gods favored the proposed expedition. During battles, religious specialists watched for omens that might indicate divine approval or disapproval of tactical decisions. This integration of religious practice with military affairs wasn't just superstition, but a sophisticated system for maintaining morale and unit cohesion under the extreme stresses of ancient combat. These religious dimensions of Etruscan warfare also served diplomatic functions, providing frameworks for negotiating with enemies and allies who shared similar beliefs about divine intervention in human affairs. Treaties could be sanctified through religious ceremonies that invoked supernatural penalties for violations. Truces and armistices could be negotiated through religious intermediaries who enjoyed special protection from both sides. The combination of tactical innovation, technological superiority, and religious integration created military traditions that allowed Etruscan cities to dominate central Italy for several centuries. Their armies were feared and respected throughout the region, and their military reputation attracted allies who sought protection against common enemies. The success of Etruscan military institutions provided the security that allowed their commercial and artistic achievements to flourish during the civilization's golden age. But military excellence alone couldn't guarantee permanent security in the competitive world of ancient Italy. As new powers emerged and existing enemies grew stronger, the decentralized nature of Etruscan political organization began to create vulnerabilities that more unified opponents could exploit. The rise of Rome would ultimately test whether Etruscan military traditions could adapt to meet challenges from a fundamentally different type of political and military system. The story of how these military confrontations unfolded and how Etruscan civilization ultimately responded to the growing Roman threat reveals fascinating insights into how ancient societies adapted to changing strategic environments. It also shows how military traditions could survive political conquest, influencing the very forces that destroyed the independence of their creators. The religious foundations that underpinned Etruscan military culture also shaped their approach to governance and law in ways that created remarkably sophisticated political institutions. Etruscan cities developed legal systems that emphasized compensation rather than retribution, creating frameworks for resolving disputes that prioritize social harmony over punishment. Their approach to justice reflected the same practical wisdom that characterized their military and commercial activities, seeking solutions that strengthened community bonds rather than simply inflicting suffering on wrongdoers. Etruscan law codes, where they survive, reveal a society that had developed nuanced approaches to complex social problems. Rather than prescribing fixed punishments for specific crimes, Etruscan legal traditions emphasized restoration and reintegration of offenders into community life. Financial compensation was preferred over physical punishment, and even serious crimes could often be resolved through payments that acknowledged harm while avoiding the cycle of violence that plagued many ancient societies. This emphasis on restorative rather than retributive justice reflected deeper Etruscan values about the nature of community and social responsibility. Their legal traditions recognized that crime often resulted from social pressures and economic hardships that could be addressed through community intervention rather than individual punishment. By focusing on compensation and restoration, Etruscan law sought to heal the social fabric rather than simply deterring future violations through fear. The sophistication of Etruscan legal thinking is particularly evident in their approach to property rights and commercial law. As a civilization built on trade and manufacturing, they needed legal frameworks that could handle complex business relationships, international commerce, and the inevitable disputes that arose from commercial activities. Their legal traditions developed detailed provisions for contracts, partnerships, and commercial disputes that reflected deep understanding of how economic relationships actually functioned. Women's elevated status in Etruscan society was reflected and protected through legal institutions that granted them rights unavailable elsewhere in the ancient world. Etruscan women could own property, enter into contracts, and participate in legal proceedings as independent actors rather than dependents of male relatives. This legal recognition of women's capacity reinforced the social freedoms they enjoyed and provided institutional support for their economic and political activities. The integration of religious and secular authority in Etruscan political systems created unique approaches to governance that balanced divine mandate with practical administration. Kings and magistrates weren't just political leaders, but religious figures responsible for maintaining proper relationships between their communities and the gods. This sacred dimension of political authority provided legitimacy while also creating constraints on how power could be exercised. Religious requirements for consultation with divine will through divination created checks on arbitrary decision-making that protected citizens from capricious governance. Major policy decisions required religious validation through examination of omens and sacrificial signs, ensuring that political leaders couldn't simply impose their personal preferences without considering broader community welfare and divine approval. These religious constraints on political power also created opportunities for priestly classes to influence governance in ways that balanced secular and sacred concerns. Haruspices and other religious specialists enjoyed considerable prestige and could effectively veto political decisions by declaring them contrary to divine will. This system created multiple centers of authority that prevented excessive concentration of power while maintaining effective governance. The federal structure of Etruscan political organization reflected similar balancing acts between local autonomy and collective action. Individual cities maintained sovereignty over their internal affairs while participating in broader institutions that coordinated responses to shared challenges. This federal approach allowed for diversity and experimentation in governance, while providing mechanisms for cooperation when circumstances required unified action. Annual assemblies of the Etruscan Federation served multiple functions beyond simple political coordination. These gatherings were also religious festivals that reinforced cultural bonds between cities, commercial fairs that facilitated trade relationships, and social events that strengthened personal connections among political leaders. By integrating political, religious, commercial, and social functions, these assemblies created comprehensive frameworks for maintaining federal cohesion. The selection of federal officials through these assemblies demonstrated Etruscan commitment to merit-based leadership that transcended narrow city loyalties. Religious specialists, military commanders, and diplomatic representatives were chosen based on their demonstrated competence and broad acceptance, rather than simply their local political connections. This approach helped ensure that federal institutions commanded respect and effectiveness across the entire Etruscan world. But the very success of Etruscan federal institutions also created challenges that would eventually contribute to their civilization's vulnerability. The prosperity and cultural achievements that Etruscan political organization had fostered attracted attention from ambitious neighbors who coveted their wealth and territories. The balance between local autonomy and collective security that had worked well during Etruscan expansion became more difficult to maintain when facing external pressures that demanded rapid, coordinated responses. The rise of Rome as a regional power would ultimately test whether Etruscan political institutions could adapt to meet challenges from a more centralized and militaristic opponent. The story of how these two different approaches to governance and military organization interacted reveals fascinating insights into how political systems succeed or fail under pressure, and why some institutional arrangements prove more resilient than others when facing existential threats. Coming up next here on Obscure Historiesa, we'll explore the golden age of Etruscan artistic achievement and discover how their creative innovations influenced artistic traditions throughout the ancient world. We'll examine the spectacular tomb paintings that provide our most vivid glimpses into Etruscan daily life, investigate the technological mastery that made Etruscan craftsmen legendary across the Mediterranean, and reveal how Etruscan artistic traditions survived even after their political independence was lost to Roman conquest. Conquest. The artistic legacy of Etruscan civilization represents one of the most remarkable achievements of the ancient world, creating works of such beauty and technical sophistication that they continued to inspire artists long after the civilization that produced them had vanished into history. What makes Etruscan art particularly fascinating is not just its aesthetic excellence, but the unique window it provides into a society that celebrated life with an intensity and joy that seems almost modern in its sensibility. The tomb paintings that survive in sites like Tarquinia offer us our most intimate glimpses into how the Etruscans actually lived, loved, and celebrated. These aren't the static, formal representations we often associate with ancient art, but vibrant, dynamic scenes that pulse with energy and emotion. The Tomb of the Leopards, discovered in the 19th century, contains frescoes that seem to capture a moment frozen in time, with nude wrestlers grappling in athletic competition while musicians play, and a banqueting couple gazes upon symbols of eternal life. What strikes modern viewers immediately about these paintings is their humanity. The figures aren't idealized gods or distant monarchs, but recognizable people engaged in activities that feel familiar across the millennia. We see musicians lost in the joy of performance, their faces animated with concentration and pleasure. Dancers move with fluid grace that suggests the painters observed real performers and captured not just their poses, but the essence of their movement. The technical mastery required to create these works was extraordinary. Etruscan painters developed sophisticated techniques for mixing pigments from natural materials, creating colours that have retained their vibrancy for over 2,000 years. White came from chalk deposits, black from carefully prepared organic compounds, red and yellow from iron oxides found throughout central Italy, and green from malachite that had to be imported from distant sources. But technical skill alone doesn't explain the power of Etruscan painting. What sets these works apart is their emotional resonance and the distinctive Etruscan approach to depicting human experience. Unlike contemporary Greek art that often emphasized idealized perfection, Etruscan artists celebrated the particular and the individual. Their subjects have distinctive faces, unique expressions, and personal characteristics that make them feel like portraits of real people rather than generic representations. The Tomb of the Bulls represents another dimension of Etruscan artistic achievement, combining mythological narratives with distinctly Etruscan interpretations that create something entirely new. The complex frescoes in this tomb tell stories that blend Greek mythological themes with local traditions and beliefs, creating hybrid narratives that reflect the cosmopolitan nature of Etruscan culture while maintaining its distinctive identity. What makes these mythological scenes particularly interesting is how they reveal Etruscan attitudes towards storytelling and cultural adaptation. Rather than simply copying Greek artistic conventions, Etruscan painters transformed borrowed themes through their own cultural lens, creating works that spoke to Etruscan audiences while demonstrating their familiarity with broader Mediterranean artistic traditions. The Francois tomb takes this artistic sophistication even further, featuring historical narratives that represent some of the earliest examples of history painting in Western art. The battle scenes depicted in this tomb required not just technical skill, but sophisticated understanding of composition, movement, and dramatic storytelling. Multiple figures are arranged in complex groupings that convey action and emotion while maintaining visual coherence across large wall surfaces. These historical paintings also reveal how the Etruscans viewed their own place in the broader sweep of Mediterranean history. The scenes don't just depict generic battles, but specific events with identifiable participants, suggesting that Etruscan artists and their patrons saw themselves as active participants in the great historical dramas of their time, rather than passive observers of distant events. The preservation of inscriptions within these tomb paintings provides additional layers of meaning that help us understand Etruscan artistic intentions. Names and titles identify specific individuals, transforming what might otherwise be anonymous figures into portraits of actual historical personalities. This emphasis on individual identity reflects the broader Etruscan celebration of personal achievement and social recognition that characterized their civilization. Beyond tomb painting, Etruscan artistic achievement extended into virtually every medium available to ancient craftsmen. Their work in bronze represents perhaps the pinnacle of ancient metalworking, combining technical mastery with artistic vision in ways that created objects of breathtaking beauty and sophistication. The famous Chimera of Arezzo demonstrates how Etruscan bronze workers could capture the essence of mythological creatures with anatomical precision and emotional power that still moves viewers today. This bronze casting expertise wasn't limited to large sculptural works, but extended to countless smaller objects that demonstrate the broad distribution of artistic excellence throughout Etruscan society. Bronze mirrors decorated with intricate mythological scenes were common grave goods, suggesting that even relatively ordinary citizens had access to objects that would be considered masterpieces by modern standards. The technical innovations developed by Etruscan metalworkers influenced craftsmanship throughout the ancient world. Their mastery of techniques like granulation, where tiny spheres of gold are fused to create decorative patterns, required such precise temperature control and timing that the methods were lost for centuries after Etruscan civilization declined. Modern jewelers have only recently rediscovered how to achieve the effects that Etruscan craftsmen routinely produced in their workshops. Etruscan pottery represents another dimension of their artistic achievement, though one that demonstrates different aesthetic priorities from their metalwork and painting. While some Etruscan ceramics achieved remarkable decorative sophistication, much of their pottery was designed for practical use rather than pure aesthetic display. This doesn't mean it lacked artistic merit, but rather that Etruscan potters understood how to balance functional requirements with decorative elements. The most spectacular examples of Etruscan ceramic art include vessels formed in the shapes of animals or mythological creatures, demonstrating the playful creativity that characterized much of their artistic production. Bulls, lions, eagles, and rams were transformed into functional drinking vessels that combined practical utility with whimsical artistry. Even more remarkable are ceramic vessels that incorporate complex mechanical elements, like the famous vessel with bulls' heads, whose mouths pour liquid when the container is filled. These mechanical innovations in ceramic art reveal the Etruscan fascination with technical ingenuity that extended far beyond purely aesthetic concerns. They delighted in creating objects that surprised and amazed users through unexpected functions or hidden mechanisms. This love of technical virtuosity reflects a broader cultural attitude that celebrated cleverness and innovation in all aspects of life. The Etruscan approach to artistic production was fundamentally different from what we might expect in ancient societies. Rather than concentrating artistic excellence in royal workshops or religious institutions, they developed systems that distributed artistic skills throughout their communities. Local workshops in cities across Etruscan territory produced objects of remarkable quality, suggesting that artistic training and technical knowledge were widely shared, rather than jealously guarded by elite specialists. This democratization of artistic production had profound effects on Etruscan cultural development. It meant that artistic innovation could emerge from anywhere within their society, not just from centralized court workshops. Local traditions could develop and flourish, creating regional variations that enrich the overall artistic heritage while maintaining recognizably Etruscan characteristics. The economic implications of this distributed artistic production were equally significant. Skilled craftsmen could achieve wealth and social recognition through their work, creating incentives for artistic excellence that extended throughout Etruscan society. The discovery of elaborate workshops in cities like Volsi demonstrates how artistic production could become the foundation for substantial commercial enterprises that connected local craftsmen with customers across the Mediterranean. International trade relationships also profoundly influenced Etruscan artistic development, exposing local artists to techniques and styles from across the ancient world. Greek pottery found in Etruscan tombs wasn't just imported luxury goods, but sources of inspiration that Etruscan artists adapted and transformed through their own cultural perspectives. The result was artistic production that was simultaneously cosmopolitan and distinctly local. This cultural exchange wasn't one-directional either. Etruscan artistic innovations influenced developments throughout the Mediterranean, particularly in metalworking and ceramic techniques that spread through trade networks to workshops in Greece, Phoenicia, and eventually Rome. The artistic dialogue between Etruscan craftsmen and their foreign counterparts created feedback loops that accelerated innovation and artistic development across the ancient world. The religious dimensions of Etruscan art add additional layers of meaning that help us understand how aesthetic and spiritual concerns interacted in their society. Much of their most sophisticated artistic production was created for religious purposes, either as temple decorations, votive offerings, or tomb furnishings intended to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. This religious context didn't constrain artistic creativity, but rather provided frameworks that encouraged artistic excellence as forms of devotion and spiritual expression. Temple architecture represented another arena where Etruscan artistic achievement reached remarkable heights. Their distinctive architectural style, featuring high podiums with frontal staircases and elaborate terracotta decorations, created buildings that were both functionally effective and visually spectacular. The terracotta sculptures that adorn these temples demonstrate the same technical mastery and artistic vision that characterized Etruscan work in other media. The preservation of these architectural elements provides insights into how Etruscan artists approached large-scale projects that required coordination between multiple craftsmen working in different media. The integration of sculptural elements with architectural frameworks required sophisticated planning and execution that demonstrates the organizational capabilities of Etruscan artistic workshops. Color played crucial roles in Etruscan architectural decoration, with painted terracotta elements creating vibrant visual effects that would have made their temples' landmarks visible from great distances. The psychological impact of these colorful buildings on ancient viewers must have been profound, reinforcing the connection between artistic beauty and religious devotion that characterized Etruscan spiritual life. The survival of Etruscan artistic traditions, long after their political independence was lost, demonstrates the enduring power of their creative innovations. Roman artists and patrons continue to value Etruscan techniques and aesthetic approaches, incorporating them into evolving Roman artistic traditions that would eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean world. This cultural continuity ensures that Etruscan artistic achievement remained influential long after their cities had been absorbed into the Roman state. The rediscovery of Etruscan art during the Renaissance created new waves of influence that continue to this day. Renaissance artists and collectors were fascinated by Etruscan works, seeing in them alternatives to Greek and Roman artistic traditions that offered fresh perspectives on classical themes. This Renaissance interest sparked scholarly investigations that laid the foundations for modern Etruscan studies. Modern archaeological techniques have revealed new dimensions of Etruscan artistic achievement that earlier generations of scholars couldn't access. Advanced imaging technologies allow us to see details in tomb paintings that had been invisible to previous investigators. Chemical analysis of pigments and materials provides insights into Etruscan technical methods that help us understand how they achieved their remarkable artistic effects. These ongoing discoveries continue to reshape our understanding of Etruscan civilization and its place in ancient Mediterranean culture. Each new find adds pieces to the puzzle of how this remarkable society created works of art that continue to inspire and amaze viewers more than 2,000 years after they were created. The artistic legacy of the Etruscans represents far more than just aesthetic achievement. Their works provide windows into a civilization that celebrated human creativity, technical innovation, and cultural exchange in ways that created lasting contributions to Western artistic traditions. Understanding their artistic achievements helps us appreciate not just their technical skills, but the values and attitudes that made such creativity possible. But artistic excellence was just one component of a comprehensive cultural achievement that encompassed every aspect of Etruscan society. Their innovations in metallurgy, engineering, and manufacturing created the economic foundations that supported their artistic flowering while contributing to technological development throughout the ancient world. The integration of these various achievements into a coherent civilization represents one of the most remarkable cultural accomplishments in human history. Coming up next here on Obscure Historiesa, we'll explore the technological innovations that made Etruscan prosperity possible and examine how their engineering achievements created the infrastructure that supported their artistic and cultural accomplishments. We'll investigate their revolutionary approaches to urban planning, discover the mining and metallurgical techniques that gave them competitive advantages throughout the Mediterranean, and reveal how their technological legacy influenced the development of Roman engineering that would transform the ancient world. The technological foundations of Etruscan civilization were every bit as remarkable as their artistic achievements, representing innovations that transformed not just their own society, but influenced technological development throughout the ancient Mediterranean. What makes their technological accomplishments particularly impressive is how they integrated practical engineering with aesthetic considerations, creating solutions that were both functionally superior and visually appealing. Etruscan urban planning demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how cities should be organized to support both daily life and long-term growth. Their cities weren't haphazard collections of buildings that had grown organically over time, but carefully planned communities that incorporated advanced engineering solutions for water management, waste disposal, and transportation infrastructure. The city of Veii, for example, featured an extensive tunnel system that channeled water throughout the urban area with precision that modern engineers still admire. These water management systems reveal the Etruscan mastery of hydraulic engineering that allowed them to support large urban populations in regions that might otherwise have struggled with water scarcity. They developed techniques for channeling natural springs, collecting rainwater, and distributing clean water to public fountains and private homes that created standards of urban living that wouldn't be matched elsewhere for centuries. The famous cuniculi, underground drainage tunnels that still function in parts of central Italy today, demonstrate Etruscan engineering capabilities that required not just technical skill, but sophisticated project management and organizational abilities. These tunnels, some stretching for miles underground, required precise surveying to maintain proper gradients and careful construction techniques to ensure structural stability over centuries of use. Archaeological investigation of these tunnel systems has revealed the remarkable precision of Etruscan engineering calculations. The gradients are maintained with mathematical accuracy that ensured proper water flow while preventing erosion that could have undermined the entire system. The construction techniques incorporated features like inspection chambers and maintenance access points that demonstrate forward-thinking planning for long-term system operation. The organizational challenges involved in constructing these engineering projects must have been enormous, requiring coordination between surveyors, excavators, stonemasons, and project managers working over extended periods. The successful completion of such complex undertakings demonstrates sophisticated administrative capabilities that extended far beyond simple technical knowledge. Etruscan mining technology represented another area where their innovations created lasting influences on technological development throughout the ancient world. The rich mineral deposits of central Italy provided them with abundant raw materials, but extracting these resources required engineering solutions that pushed the boundaries of ancient technology. Their mining techniques incorporated ventilation systems, drainage solutions, and extraction methods that allowed them to work deposits that would have been inaccessible to less sophisticated operations. The scale of Etruscan mining operations was truly impressive, with some sites featuring underground workings that extended hundreds of feet below the surface. These deep mines required engineering solutions for problems like water infiltration, structural support, and worker safety that demanded innovative approaches to underground construction. The wooden support systems they developed, where traces survive, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles. Surface mining operations reveal different aspects of Etruscan technological capability, particularly in their development of techniques for processing large volumes of ore efficiently. The smelting facilities discovered at sites like Populonia incorporated features like improved furnace designs, better heat management systems, and more effective methods for separating metals from waste materials that increased both productivity and quality. The metallurgical innovations developed in these operations had implications that extended far beyond simple metal production. Etruscan smiths developed alloy compositions that created bronze with superior working properties, allowing them to create objects that were both more durable and easier to work than materials available to their competitors. These technical advances gave Etruscan craftsmen significant advantages in both military and civilian applications. The precision of Etruscan metalworking is evident in objects like the famous bronze liver from Piacenza, which demonstrates their ability to create complex three-dimensional forms with mathematical accuracy that served both practical and religious purposes. The technical challenges involved in casting such objects required understanding of metal flow, cooling rates, and shrinkage compensation that represents sophisticated metallurgical knowledge. Heat treatment techniques developed by Etruscan metalworkers allowed them to modify the properties of bronze and iron in ways that optimized tools and weapons for specific applications. Archaeological analysis of Etruscan metal objects reveals evidence for controlled heating and cooling processes that created materials with desired hardness, flexibility, and durability characteristics. The integration of artistic and technical considerations in Etruscan metalworking created objects that were simultaneously functional tools and aesthetic achievements. Their bronze mirrors, for example, required technical precision to create reflective surfaces while incorporating decorative elements that made them objects of beauty as well as utility. This combination of practical and aesthetic concerns characterized much of Etruscan technological development. Etruscan innovations in manufacturing techniques extended beyond metalworking to include advances in ceramic production, textile manufacturing, and woodworking that created comprehensive technological capabilities supporting their entire economy. Their pottery workshops developed techniques for achieving consistent quality in mass production while maintaining the ability to create specialized objects for specific purposes. The organizational systems that supported these manufacturing operations required sophisticated approaches to quality control, resource management, and distribution that demonstrate advanced understanding of what we might now recognize as industrial engineering principles. Workshop layouts optimized workflow efficiency while incorporating features that enhanced both worker productivity and product quality. Transportation infrastructure represented another area where Etruscan engineering created lasting contributions to technological development. Their road-building techniques incorporated features like proper drainage, durable surface materials, and strategic routing that created transportation networks supporting both military operations and commercial activities. Some of these roads continued to be used long after Etruscan political independence was lost, demonstrating the quality of their construction. Bridge construction required engineering solutions for spanning rivers and valleys that challenged ancient construction capabilities. Archaeological evidence suggests that Etruscan engineers developed techniques for creating foundations in difficult terrain and spanning substantial distances, with structures that remained stable over centuries of use. These achievements required understanding of structural engineering principles that wouldn't be systematically codified until much later periods. The harbours and port facilities constructed by Etruscan engineers supported maritime commerce that connected their cities with trading partners throughout the Mediterranean. These installations required solutions for problems like tidal variation, storm protection, and cargo handling that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of marine engineering challenges. Shipbuilding technology, developed by Etruscan craftsmen, incorporated innovations that improved both the seaworthiness and cargo capacity of vessels used in their extensive trading operations. Archaeological remains of Etruscan ships reveal construction techniques that balance structural strength with weight considerations, creating vessels capable of carrying substantial cargoes over long distances safely. The precision of Etruscan engineering is perhaps most evident in their architectural achievements, where structural considerations had to be balanced with aesthetic requirements to create buildings that were both beautiful and durable. Their temple construction incorporated features like advanced foundation systems, sophisticated load distribution, and weather protection that ensured structural integrity over extended periods. The famous arch construction techniques that would later become synonymous with Roman engineering actually had important precedents in Etruscan building practices. Archaeological evidence suggests that Etruscan engineers understood and applied principles of arch construction that distributed loads effectively while creating interior spaces larger than could be achieved with simple post and lintel systems. Heating and ventilation systems in Etruscan buildings demonstrate their understanding of environmental control that created comfortable interior conditions even in challenging climates. The hypercore systems found in some Etruscan buildings anticipate similar Roman innovations by incorporating features that distributed heated air efficiently throughout interior spaces. The integration of functional and decorative elements in Etruscan architecture required coordination between engineers and artists that produced buildings serving multiple purposes simultaneously. Structural elements like columns and supports incorporated decorative features that enhanced aesthetic appeal while maintaining their load-bearing capabilities. Construction management techniques developed for these complex projects required organizational skills that coordinated multiple crafts and specialties working together over extended periods. The successful completion of major architectural projects demonstrates administrative capabilities that supported technological achievement through effective project planning and resource management. The agricultural technology developed by Etruscan farmers incorporated innovations that increased productivity while maintaining soil fertility over long periods. Their understanding of crop rotation, irrigation techniques, and soil management created agricultural systems that supported substantial urban populations while generating surpluses for trade. Specialized agricultural tools and equipment designed by Etruscan craftsmen optimized farming operations for the specific conditions found in central Italy. The design of plows, harvesting implements, and processing equipment demonstrates attention to ergonomic considerations that reduced labor requirements while improving operational efficiency. The technological legacy of Etruscan civilization influenced developments throughout the ancient world, particularly through its impact on Roman engineering practices that would eventually transform Mediterranean civilization. Many techniques and approaches that we associate with Roman technological achievement actually had important precedents in earlier Etruscan innovations. This technological continuity demonstrates how engineering knowledge could survive political conquest, passing from the conquered civilization to its conquerors in ways that enrich the overall technological heritage of the ancient world. The absorption of Etruscan technical expertise into Roman engineering practice created synergies that accelerated technological development beyond what either civilization might have achieved independently. Understanding Etruscan technological achievements helps us appreciate how ancient civilizations could create sophisticated solutions to complex engineering challenges using the materials and methods available to them. Their innovations demonstrate that technological progress doesn't require modern materials or power sources, but rather depends on careful observation, systematic experimentation, and creative problem-solving approaches. The comprehensive nature of Etruscan technological development, spanning everything from urban infrastructure to manufacturing techniques, created foundations that supported their remarkable cultural achievements while contributing to technological progress throughout the ancient Mediterranean. Their example demonstrates how technological innovation and cultural accomplishment could reinforce each other in ways that created lasting legacies extending far beyond their original historical context. But even the most sophisticated technology and remarkable cultural achievements couldn't protect Etruscan civilization from the fundamental political and military challenges that would ultimately determine its fate. The rise of Rome as a regional power created pressures that would test whether Etruscan institutions and traditions could adapt to survive in a rapidly changing strategic environment. Next time here on Obscure Historiesa, we'll examine how the complex relationship between Etruscan cities and the emerging Roman state evolved from early cooperation through increasing competition to eventual conquest and absorption. We'll discover how Etruscan political traditions influence the development of Roman republican institutions, explore the military campaigns that gradually reduced Etruscan independence, and reveal how Etruscan culture survived and influenced Roman civilization long after their political autonomy was lost. The relationship between the emerging Roman state and the established Etruscan cities began not with conquest, but with complex patterns of cooperation, competition, and cultural exchange that would shape the development of both civilizations. What makes this relationship particularly fascinating is how it evolved from mutual respect and occasional alliance to inevitable conflict as Roman ambitions grew beyond their original territorial boundaries. Early Roman-Etruscan interactions were characterized by pragmatic cooperation rather than hostility. Rome itself had been profoundly influenced by Etruscan civilization from its very founding, with archaeological evidence suggesting that Etruscan kings had actually ruled Rome during crucial periods of its early development. The legendary Tarquin dynasty, which according to Roman tradition provided Rome's last three kings, were almost certainly of Etruscan origin, bringing with them political institutions, religious practices, and cultural traditions that became foundational elements of Roman civilization. This early period of Etruscan influence on Rome wasn't simply political domination, but rather a complex process of cultural transmission that transformed both societies. Roman religious practices incorporated Etruscan divination techniques, particularly the consultation of haruspices for major state decisions. Roman political institutions adopted Etruscan concepts of royal authority and civic organization. Even Roman military practices showed clear Etruscan influences, from tactical innovations to ceremonial traditions that would persist long after Roman independence was established. The transition from Etruscan monarchy to Roman Republic created new dynamics in the relationship between Rome and the Etruscan cities. The expulsion of the last Etruscan king from Rome, traditionally dated to 509 BCE, marked the beginning of a more competitive phase where Rome sought to establish itself as an independent power, while Etruscan cities attempted to maintain their traditional influence over central Italian affairs. What followed wasn't immediate warfare, but rather a complex period of shifting alliances and competing interests that reflected the broader political fragmentation characterizing central Italy during this era. Individual Etruscan cities pursued their own policies toward Rome, sometimes cooperating against common enemies, sometimes competing for control of strategic territories or trade routes. This decentralized Etruscan response to Roman expansion would prove to be one of their greatest strategic weaknesses. The city of Veii, located just 12 miles from Rome, became the focal point for the first major confrontation between Roman ambition and Etruscan resistance. The proximity of these two cities made conflict almost inevitable, as both sought to control the same agricultural lands, trade routes, and strategic positions along the Tiber River. What began as border disputes escalated into a prolonged siege that would test both Roman determination and Etruscan resilience. The Siege of Veii, lasting from 406 to 396 BCE, according to Roman sources, represented a turning point in the relationship between Rome and the Etruscan world. For the first time, Rome demonstrated the capability and determination to conduct sustained military operations against a major Etruscan city, while the other Etruscan cities failed to provide effective assistance to their besieged neighbour. The fall of Veii had profound implications that extended far beyond the immediate military victory. Rome gained control of substantial territories that doubled its agricultural base and provided resources for further expansion. More importantly, the successful siege demonstrated to other Italian peoples that Etruscan cities were vulnerable to determined assault, and that the federation structure that had been a source of strength during Etruscan expansion could become a weakness when facing unified opposition. The Roman approach to conquered Etruscan territory revealed strategic thinking that would characterize their expansion throughout Italy and the Mediterranean. Rather than simply destroying Veii and leaving the territory vacant, Roman planners established colonies that secured their territorial gains while providing land for Roman citizens seeking agricultural opportunities. This systematic approach to territorial consolidation created lasting Roman presence in formerly Etruscan regions. The religious dimensions of the Veii siege also demonstrated how Roman leaders had learned to use Etruscan traditions for their own purposes. Roman commanders consulted Etruscan haruspices about the proper timing for their final assault, and the ritual transfer of Veii's patron deity to Rome followed Etruscan religious protocols. This religious appropriation showed how Romans could adopt Etruscan practices while turning them against their original practitioners. The success at Veii encouraged Roman expansion toward other Etruscan territories, but the 4th century BCE also brought new challenges that temporarily slowed Roman progress. The Gallic invasion of 390 BCE, which resulted in the sack of Rome itself, demonstrated the vulnerability of central Italian cities to external threats and created opportunities for Etruscan cities to recover some of their lost influence. During this period of Roman weakness, several Etruscan cities attempted to reclaim territories lost to Roman expansion and to re-establish their traditional dominance over central Italian affairs. The city of Tarquinia, in particular, launched aggressive campaigns that tested Roman recovery capabilities and forced Roman leaders to divide their attention between multiple threats simultaneously. The Roman response to these Etruscan resurgence attempts revealed the systematic approach that would eventually lead to their complete victory. Rather than simply reacting to individual Etruscan initiatives, Roman strategists developed comprehensive plans for neutralizing Etruscan resistance while preventing coordination between different cities. This included diplomatic efforts to isolate individual cities from potential allies, as well as military campaigns designed to eliminate Etruscan capabilities for sustained resistance. The Battle of Lake Vadimo in 310 BCE marked another crucial turning point in Roman-Etruscan relations. This engagement saw Roman forces decisively defeat a coalition of Etruscan armies that represented the most serious attempt to coordinate resistance against Roman expansion. The scale of the Roman victory and the heavy casualties inflicted on Etruscan forces effectively ended any possibility of successful military resistance to Roman domination. What makes this battle particularly significant is how it demonstrated the evolution of Roman military capabilities beyond their original Etruscan influences. Roman tactical innovations, organizational improvements, and logistical advantages had reached levels that allowed them to defeat Etruscan armies that were using military traditions Rome had originally learned from Etruscan teachers. The student had definitively surpassed the master. The aftermath of Lake Vadimo saw the beginning of systematic Roman absorption of Etruscan territories and populations. Unlike earlier conquests that had focused primarily on territorial acquisition, Roman policy now emphasized the integration of conquered peoples into Roman political and social structures. This approach recognized that lasting control required more than military occupation. It demanded the transformation of conquered societies into willing participants in Roman expansion. Roman colonial policies in conquered Etruscan territories balanced security considerations with economic development in ways that created lasting foundations for Roman control. Strategic locations received Roman colonies that served as military bases and administrative centers, while existing Etruscan cities that submitted peacefully were allowed to maintain local autonomy under Roman supervision. This flexible approach encouraged surrender while discouraging resistance. The legal frameworks developed for governing former Etruscan territories became models for Roman administration throughout their expanding empire. Different categories of citizenship were created that provided pathways for integration while maintaining Roman control over key political and military functions. Etruscan aristocrats who cooperated with Roman administration could achieve positions of influence within the Roman system, while those who resisted faced confiscation of property and exile. Cultural policies adopted toward conquered Etruscan populations revealed Roman understanding of how to manage diverse ethnic groups within their expanding state. Rather than attempting to eliminate Etruscan cultural traditions entirely, Roman administrators allowed continuation of local practices that didn't threaten Roman authority while gradually promoting adoption of Roman customs and values. This cultural flexibility encouraged acceptance of Roman rule while facilitating long-term assimilation. The economic integration of former Etruscan territories into the Roman system proved particularly effective in creating lasting loyalty to Roman rule. Etruscan craftsmen found new markets for their products throughout the Roman world, while Etruscan merchants gained access to trading opportunities that extended far beyond their traditional territorial boundaries. This economic integration created vested interests in Roman success that transcended ethnic loyalties. Religious integration presented more complex challenges, given the central role that religious traditions played in Etruscan identity and social organization. Roman religious policies toward conquered Etruscan populations demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how to manage cultural sensitivities while achieving political objectives. Etruscan religious practices were allowed to continue where they didn't conflict with Roman state religion, while Etruscan religious specialists were incorporated into Roman religious institutions. The famous integration of Etruscan haruspices into Roman religious practice exemplifies this approach. Rather than suppressing Etruscan divination traditions, Roman leaders institutionalized them within Roman governmental procedures. Etruscan religious specialists became valued advisors whose expertise was sought for major state decisions, creating pathways for Etruscan cultural influence within Roman political structures. This religious integration also served Roman strategic interests by providing legitimacy for Roman rule among Etruscan populations. When Roman policies received validation from respected Etruscan religious authorities, it became much more difficult for potential rebels to claim divine sanction for resistance movements. The co-optation of Etruscan religious leadership proved to be one of the most effective Roman strategies for managing conquered populations. The gradual transformation of Etruscan society under Roman rule reveals how imperial systems can preserve cultural elements while fundamentally altering their political and social contexts. Etruscan artistic traditions continued to flourish under Roman patronage, but they increasingly served Roman rather than Etruscan political purposes. Etruscan technological expertise was maintained and expanded, but it was directed toward Roman rather than Etruscan objectives. Individual Etruscan cities experienced this transformation differently depending on their strategic importance, their resistance to Roman expansion, and their willingness to adapt to Roman administrative systems. Cities that submitted early and cooperated fully with Roman policies often prospered under Roman rule, gaining access to resources and opportunities that exceeded what they had enjoyed during Etruscan independence. Cities that resisted Roman expansion faced harsher treatment, including population transfers and territorial confiscations that eliminated their capacity for future resistance. The city of Caere provides an excellent example of successful adaptation to Roman rule. This ancient Etruscan centre had maintained friendly relations with Rome even during periods of general hostility, providing assistance during the Gallic invasion and cooperating with Roman expansion policies. As a result, Caere received favourable treatment that allowed it to maintain much of its traditional autonomy while enjoying the benefits of Roman protection and access to Roman markets. Tarquinia presents a contrasting example of how resistance to Roman expansion could lead to much harsher consequences. This city's aggressive opposition to Roman policies resulted in military campaigns that devastated its territory and population transfers that broke up traditional social structures. While Tarquinia eventually recovered under Roman rule, the process required generations and fundamentally altered the character of the city. The transformation of Etruscan military traditions under Roman rule demonstrates how imperial systems could preserve useful elements of conquered cultures while redirecting them toward imperial purposes. Etruscan military expertise was incorporated into Roman military institutions, with former Etruscan warriors serving in Roman armies and Etruscan military innovations being adopted by Roman commanders. However, this military integration was carefully managed to prevent the formation of distinct Etruscan military units that might become focal points for rebellion. Roman policies toward Etruscan aristocratic families revealed sophisticated understanding of how to manage potential sources of opposition while utilizing their expertise and influence. Wealthy Etruscan families who cooperated with Roman administration could maintain their social positions and economic interests, often achieving influence within Roman political structures that exceeded what they had possessed during Etruscan independence. This created powerful incentives for collaboration while providing Roman administrators with local expertise and legitimacy. The educational opportunities available to young Etruscans under Roman rule facilitated cultural integration while preserving useful elements of Etruscan knowledge. Etruscan youths from prominent families could receive Roman educations that prepared them for careers within Roman administrative and military systems, while Etruscan specialists in areas like engineering, medicine, and religious practice could transmit their knowledge to Roman students. This educational integration created pathways for cultural transmission that benefited both groups. Marriage policies that encouraged unions between Roman and Etruscan families accelerated the integration process while creating kinship networks that crossed ethnic boundaries. These intermarriages produced children who were simultaneously Roman citizens and bearers of Etruscan cultural traditions, creating hybrid identities that facilitated the gradual merger of the two populations. Over several generations, the distinction between Roman and Etruscan became increasingly meaningless in practical terms. The linguistic transformation of formerly Etruscan territories reveals another dimension of how Roman rule gradually altered cultural landscapes. While Etruscan continued to be spoken in domestic contexts for generations after political conquest, Latin became the language of administration, commerce, and higher education. This linguistic shift was gradual rather than forced, reflecting practical advantages of Latin fluency rather than cultural oppression. But its cumulative effect was the eventual elimination of Etruscan as a living language. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout former Etruscan territory demonstrates the complex process of cultural transformation that occurred under Roman rule. Material culture shows gradual adoption of Roman styles and practices, alongside continuation of traditional Etruscan elements, creating hybrid forms that reflected the cultural mixing occurring in these communities. Burial practices, architectural styles, and artistic motifs all show evidence of this cultural blending that characterized the transition from Etruscan to Roman identity. The economic prosperity that many former Etruscan territories experienced under Roman rule provided practical incentives for accepting cultural transformation. Roman investment in infrastructure, expansion of trade networks, and development of new markets created economic opportunities that exceeded what had been available during Etruscan independence. This prosperity made Roman rule popular among populations who might otherwise have resented foreign domination. Urban development in former Etruscan cities under Roman administration demonstrates how imperial policies could enhance local prosperity while serving Roman strategic interests. Roman engineering expertise was applied to improving water systems, transportation infrastructure, and public buildings in ways that created better living conditions, while also facilitating Roman administrative control and military deployment. The preservation of Etruscan cultural elements within Roman civilization ensured that their influence would extend far beyond the period of their political independence. Etruscan artistic techniques, religious practices, and technological innovations became integral parts of Roman culture that would eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean world. In this sense, Etruscan civilization achieved a form of immortality through its absorption into the Roman system. The gradual disappearance of distinct Etruscan political identity was accompanied by the preservation and transformation of Etruscan cultural contributions that continued to influence Roman development for centuries. This pattern of political absorption, combined with cultural preservation, would become characteristic of Roman imperial expansion throughout the Mediterranean, creating a model for how diverse populations could be integrated into unified political systems while maintaining cultural diversity. Understanding the complex process by which Etruscan civilization was absorbed into the Roman world provides insights into how ancient imperial systems managed cultural diversity and political integration. The Roman approach to Etruscan conquest and absorption demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how to transform potential enemies into loyal subjects while preserving valuable elements of conquered cultures. The success of Roman policies toward the Etruscan population also reveals how imperial expansion could create mutual benefits that transcended simple domination relationships. While the Etruscans lost their political independence, many individuals and communities prospered under Roman rule in ways that would have been impossible within the constraints of the traditional Etruscan city-state system. But the story of Etruscan absorption into Roman civilization is just one chapter in the broader narrative of how Roman expansion transformed the Mediterranean world. The techniques and policies developed for managing Etruscan integration would be applied throughout Roman conquests, creating patterns of cultural assimilation and political integration that would shape the development of Western civilization. Coming up next here on Obscure Historiesa, we'll explore the lasting legacies of Etruscan civilization and discover how their contributions continued to influence Roman society long after their political independence was lost. We'll examine the specific ways that Etruscan innovations in religion, art, technology, and governance shaped the development of Roman institutions, investigate how Etruscan cultural traditions survived within Roman society, and reveal how the rediscovery of Etruscan civilization during the Renaissance created new appreciation for this remarkable ancient culture that had been hidden in plain sight for over a millennium. The legacy of Etruscan civilization within Roman society was far more profound and enduring than most people realize, creating influences that would shape the very foundations of what we consider classical Roman culture. What makes this cultural transmission particularly fascinating is how thoroughly Etruscan elements became integrated into Roman identity often to the point where Romans themselves forgot the foreign origins of their most cherished traditions. Roman religious practices retained Etruscan influences that persisted throughout the empire's entire history, demonstrating the deep spiritual connections that bound these two civilizations together. The College of Haruspices, Etruscan priests who interpreted divine will through examination of sacrificial animals, became a permanent institution within Roman state religion. These specialists were consulted before major military campaigns, during political crises, and at moments of national uncertainty when Roman leaders needed divine guidance for crucial decisions. The integration of Etruscan divination practices into Roman governmental procedures created fascinating hybrid institutions that combined practical politics with spiritual consultation. Roman senators would delay important votes until haruspices could examine sacrificial victims and declare whether the gods favored proposed legislation. Military commanders would refuse to engage enemy forces if Etruscan religious specialists detected unfavorable omens in the flight patterns of birds or the direction of lightning strikes during storms. This religious synthesis wasn't just ceremonial decoration, but reflected genuine Roman respect for Etruscan spiritual expertise that they recognized as superior to their own original traditions. Roman religious literature preserves detailed accounts of how Etruscan priests successfully predicted military outcomes, warned of natural disasters, and provided guidance that helped Roman leaders avoid catastrophic mistakes. The practical value of this religious council ensured its continuation long after Etruscan political independence had disappeared. Roman architectural traditions absorbed Etruscan innovations that became defining characteristics of imperial building projects throughout the Mediterranean world. The distinctive Roman approach to temple construction, featuring high podiums with frontal staircases and elaborate decorative programs, derived directly from Etruscan religious architecture that had developed these features centuries earlier. Roman engineers learned Etruscan techniques for creating monumental spaces that combined functional requirements with impressive visual effects. The famous Roman mastery of arch construction had important precedents in Etruscan building practices that had explored the structural possibilities of curved stonework long before Roman architects made it their signature technique. Archaeological evidence from Etruscan sites reveals sophisticated understanding of load distribution and structural engineering that provided foundations for later Roman innovations in bridge building, aqueduct construction, and monumental architecture. Roman urban planning incorporated Etruscan approaches to city organization that emphasized the integration of practical infrastructure with religious and ceremonial requirements. The Roman practice of consulting religious authorities about proper city layouts, street orientations, and building placements reflected Etruscan beliefs about the spiritual dimensions of urban space. Even the famous Roman grid system for colonial cities showed influences from Etruscan planning principles that sought to create harmonious relationships between human settlements and divine order. The technological expertise that made Roman engineering legendary throughout the ancient world built upon foundations established by Etruscan innovations in metallurgy, mining, and manufacturing. Roman metalworkers inherited techniques for bronze casting, iron working, and precious metal fabrication that had been developed in Etruscan workshops over generations of experimentation and refinement. The superior quality of Roman military equipment owed much to Etruscan metallurgical knowledge that had been preserved and transmitted through craft traditions. Roman hydraulic engineering, which created the aqueduct systems and water management infrastructure that supported massive urban populations, incorporated principles and techniques that Etruscan engineers had pioneered in their own cities centuries earlier. The caniculi drainage systems that still function in parts of central Italy today demonstrate Etruscan engineering capabilities that Roman engineers studied, adapted, and expanded throughout their empire. The Roman approach to territorial administration reflected lessons learned from observing both the strengths and weaknesses of Etruscan political organization. Roman administrators recognized that the Etruscan federal system had created remarkable cultural and economic achievements, while also revealing vulnerabilities that more centralized opponents could exploit. Roman institutional development sought to capture the benefits of local autonomy while avoiding the coordination problems that had weakened Etruscan resistance to Roman expansion. Roman legal traditions incorporated Etruscan approaches to justice that emphasized restoration rather than retribution, creating frameworks for resolving disputes that prioritized social harmony over simple punishment. The Roman preference for compensation over physical penalties in many legal contexts reflected Etruscan judicial wisdom that recognized the importance of maintaining community cohesion, even when addressing serious crimes and social violations. The elevated status of women in early Roman society, which distinguished Roman customs from Greek practices in significant ways, showed clear influences from Etruscan social traditions that had granted women freedoms unavailable elsewhere in the ancient world. Roman marriage customs, property rights for women, and female participation in religious activities all bore traces of Etruscan precedents that had challenged conventional ancient attitudes about gender roles and social organization. Roman artistic traditions absorbed Etruscan aesthetic approaches that valued emotional expression and individual personality over idealized perfection, creating distinctive Roman styles that differed significantly from contemporary Greek artistic conventions. Roman portrait sculpture, with its emphasis on realistic representation of individual features and character, reflected Etruscan artistic values that celebrated human particularity rather than abstract beauty. The Roman love of spectacle and public entertainment showed influences from Etruscan festival traditions that had combined religious observance with community celebration in ways that created joyous occasions for all social classes. Roman amphitheatre games, theatrical performances, and public festivals incorporated elements from Etruscan ceremonial practices that understood how entertainment could serve both religious and political purposes while providing genuine pleasure for participants. Roman commercial practices and trading relationships built upon networks and techniques that Etruscan merchants had established throughout the Mediterranean world over centuries of successful business operations. Roman understanding of international commerce, contract law, and market relationships reflected Etruscan expertise that had created some of the ancient world's most sophisticated economic systems. The Roman military's tactical flexibility and organizational sophistication incorporated lessons learned from both fighting against and fighting alongside Etruscan forces during the long period of Roman expansion in central Italy. Roman commanders studied Etruscan innovations in combined arms warfare, logistics management, and strategic planning that had made Etruscan armies formidable opponents and valuable allies. Roman diplomatic traditions reflected Etruscan approaches to international relations that balanced competition with cooperation in ways that created stable relationships, even between potential enemies. The Roman practice of offering different categories of alliance and citizenship to conquered peoples showed influences from Etruscan federal institutions that had managed diversity within unified political frameworks. The linguistic legacy of Etruscan civilization within Latin reveals profound influences that shaped the development of the language that would eventually become the foundation for Romance languages throughout Europe. While Etruscan belonged to a completely different language family from Latin, centuries of contact created borrowings and adaptations that enriched Latin vocabulary and influenced its grammatical development in subtle but significant ways. Roman religious vocabulary incorporated numerous Etruscan terms for ritual practices, divine concepts, and ceremonial objects that had no Latin equivalents. These linguistic borrowings preserve evidence of cultural transmission that continued long after Etruscan ceased to be spoken as a living language. The persistence of these terms in Latin religious literature demonstrates how thoroughly Etruscan spiritual concepts had penetrated Roman consciousness. Technical vocabulary related to engineering, metallurgy, and craftsmanship shows extensive Etruscan influence that reflects the practical knowledge transfer that occurred as Roman artisans learned from Etruscan masters. Words for tools, techniques, and materials often derived from Etruscan sources, preserving linguistic evidence of the technological education that Roman craftsmen received from their Etruscan predecessors. The social terminology that Romans used to describe family relationships, social hierarchies, and community obligations incorporated Etruscan concepts that reflected different approaches to kinship and social organization. These linguistic influences provide insights into how Roman social structures absorbed elements from Etruscan society while adapting them to Roman political and cultural contexts. Roman naming conventions retained Etruscan influences that can be traced through generations of Roman families, who preserved elements of their Etruscan ancestry within their nomenclature. The Roman practice of using 3 names, including family names that indicated clan membership, showed influences from Etruscan naming systems that emphasized genealogical connections and social identity. The geographical names that Romans used for places throughout central Italy preserved Etruscan linguistic elements that maintained connections to pre-Roman cultural landscapes. Rivers, mountains, cities, and regions retained Etruscan names that embedded linguistic memories of the civilization that had first named and organized these territories for human habitation. Roman literary traditions absorbed Etruscan narrative techniques and thematic approaches that influenced the development of distinctively Roman forms of historical writing, epic poetry, and dramatic performance. The Roman emphasis on individual character development, moral complexity, and practical wisdom showed influences from Etruscan cultural values that appreciated human complexity over simple heroic idealization. The Roman approach to recording and preserving historical memory incorporated Etruscan traditions of commemorating individual achievements and family accomplishments that created comprehensive records of social and political development. Roman historical writing showed influences from Etruscan chronicle traditions that valued detailed documentation of events and personalities over abstract philosophical reflection. Roman educational practices reflected Etruscan approaches to transmitting cultural knowledge that emphasized practical skills alongside intellectual development. The Roman educational system's focus on rhetoric, law, and administration showed influences from Etruscan traditions that prepared young people for active participation in complex urban societies. The Roman understanding of childhood development and family responsibility incorporated Etruscan concepts about the proper relationships between generations and the obligations that connected family members across time. Roman family law and social customs reflected Etruscan values that emphasized continuity and mutual support within kinship networks. Roman approaches to medical knowledge and healing practices absorbed Etruscan expertise in areas like surgical techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, and therapeutic treatments that had been developed through generations of practical experience. Roman medical literature preserves references to Etruscan healing traditions that were valued for their effectiveness and incorporated into Roman medical education. The Roman calendar system incorporated Etruscan concepts about the proper timing of religious observances, agricultural activities, and political functions that reflected sophisticated understanding of seasonal cycles and their influence on human affairs. Roman festival schedules and ceremonial timing showed influences from Etruscan religious traditions that had developed complex approaches to coordinating divine and human activities. Roman agricultural practices absorbed Etruscan innovations in crop management, soil conservation, and livestock breeding that had been developed through centuries of farming in central Italian conditions. Roman agricultural literature preserves detailed descriptions of Etruscan farming techniques that were recognized as superior to original Roman methods and widely adopted throughout Roman territories. The Roman approach to managing natural resources reflected Etruscan expertise in areas like forestry, mining, and water management that had created sustainable relationships between human communities and their environmental contexts. Roman resource management policies showed influences from Etruscan practices that balanced immediate needs with long-term conservation requirements. Roman craft traditions in areas like pottery, metalworking, and textile production incorporated Etruscan techniques and aesthetic approaches that had achieved recognition for excellence throughout the Mediterranean world. Roman craftsmen learned from Etruscan masters, whose expertise had been refined through generations of innovation and artistic experimentation. The Roman luxury goods industry built upon foundations established by Etruscan artisans, whose products had created international markets for high-quality manufactured goods. Roman understanding of luxury market requirements, production techniques, and distribution systems reflected Etruscan commercial expertise that had connected local workshops with customers across the ancient world. Roman funeral practices and approaches to commemorating the deceased incorporated Etruscan traditions that emphasized celebration of individual lives and maintenance of connections between the living and the dead. Roman tomb construction, burial customs, and memorial practices showed influences from Etruscan beliefs about death and afterlife that differed significantly from Greek philosophical approaches to mortality. The Roman understanding of civic duty and public service reflected Etruscan concepts about the proper relationships between individuals and their communities that emphasized mutual responsibility and shared commitment to collective welfare. Roman political culture absorbed Etruscan values about citizenship that balanced individual rights with communal obligations. Roman concepts of honor, achievement, and social recognition incorporated Etruscan approaches to evaluating individual worth that considered practical accomplishments alongside inherited status. The Roman emphasis on merit-based advancement showed influences from Etruscan social traditions that had created opportunities for talented individuals to achieve recognition regardless of their family backgrounds. The Roman approach to international diplomacy and cultural exchange reflected Etruscan expertise in managing relationships with diverse peoples and civilizations that had different languages, customs, and political systems. Roman diplomatic traditions incorporated Etruscan techniques for negotiating agreements, managing conflicts, and creating stable relationships across cultural boundaries. Roman military engineering and siege warfare techniques absorbed Etruscan innovations that had been developed through centuries of conflict and territorial expansion in central Italy. Roman understanding of fortification design, siege equipment construction, and battlefield engineering showed influences from Etruscan military expertise that had proven effective against diverse opponents. The Roman Navy incorporated shipbuilding techniques and maritime practices that Etruscan sailors and merchants had developed through extensive trading operations throughout the Mediterranean. Roman naval architecture, navigation methods, and port facilities showed influences from Etruscan maritime expertise that had created successful commercial and military operations across ancient sea routes. Roman concepts of territorial organization and provincial administration reflected lessons learned from studying Etruscan approaches to managing diverse populations and territories within unified political systems. Roman administrative techniques incorporated Etruscan expertise in balancing local autonomy with central coordination that had enabled successful governance of complex federal arrangements. The Roman legal system's approach to contract law, commercial regulation, and dispute resolution absorbed Etruscan expertise that had been developed through centuries of managing complex economic relationships within sophisticated urban societies. Roman commercial law incorporated Etruscan concepts about fairness, responsibility, and practical problem-solving that had proven effective in real-world business situations. Roman philosophical approaches to ethics, social responsibility, and individual development showed influences from Etruscan cultural values that emphasized practical wisdom over abstract speculation. The Roman focus on character development, moral education, and civic virtue reflected Etruscan traditions that valued personal integrity and social contribution. The Roman approach to technological innovation and practical problem-solving incorporated Etruscan attitudes about experimentation, adaptation, and continuous improvement that had driven centuries of technological advancement. Roman engineering culture absorbed Etruscan values about creativity, persistence, and attention to detail that had created remarkable achievements in multiple technical fields. Roman understanding of economic development and wealth creation reflected Etruscan expertise in areas like manufacturing, trade, and resource management that had generated prosperity for entire communities over extended periods. Roman economic policies incorporated Etruscan approaches to balancing individual opportunity with collective benefit that had created sustainable foundations for long-term growth. The preservation of these diverse Etruscan influences within Roman civilization ensured that their cultural contributions would survive and spread throughout the ancient world, creating legacies that extended far beyond their original historical context. Through Roman expansion, Etruscan innovations in technology, art, religion, and social organization reached territories from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to the Middle East. This cultural transmission created a form of immortality for Etruscan civilization that transcended their political absorption into the Roman state. While the Etruscans lost their independence, their ideas, techniques, and values became integral parts of Roman culture that would influence the development of Western civilization for centuries to come. The rediscovery of Etruscan civilization during the Renaissance created new appreciation for achievements that had been forgotten or misunderstood for over a millennium. Renaissance scholars and artists were fascinated by Etruscan works that offered alternatives to Greek and Roman artistic traditions, providing fresh perspectives on classical themes and techniques that had seemed exhausted through centuries of imitation. Archaeological investigations beginning in the 18th century gradually revealed the true scope and sophistication of Etruscan achievements, challenging earlier assumptions about ancient Italian civilization that had focused almost exclusively on Roman accomplishments. The discovery of spectacular tomb paintings, elaborate bronze works, and sophisticated urban sites demonstrated that pre-Roman Italy had produced civilizations of remarkable complexity and artistic excellence. Modern scientific techniques have revolutionized our understanding of Etruscan civilization by providing tools for analyzing materials, dating artifacts, and reconstructing ancient environments that earlier generations of scholars couldn't access. Chemical analysis of pigments reveals the sophisticated techniques that Etruscan artists used to create their remarkable works. Genetic studies have finally resolved ancient debates about Etruscan origins while revealing their relationships with neighboring populations. Digital reconstruction technologies allow us to visualize Etruscan cities, temples, and artworks as they would have appeared to ancient viewers, providing insights into the visual impact and cultural significance that these works had within their original contexts. Advanced imaging techniques reveal details in tomb paintings and bronze works that had been invisible to earlier investigators, constantly expanding our understanding of Etruscan artistic achievement. The ongoing discovery of new Etruscan sites continues to surprise archaeologists and revise our understanding of their civilization's scope and sophistication. Recent excavations have revealed evidence for Etruscan settlements in areas previously thought to have been beyond their territorial boundaries, demonstrating that their influence extended even further than scholars had realized. Contemporary interest in Etruscan civilization reflects broader cultural fascination with ancient societies that developed along different lines from the Greek and Roman traditions that have dominated classical education. The Etruscan example demonstrates that there were multiple pathways to creating sophisticated urban civilizations in the ancient world, offering insights into human potential that transcend specific historical contexts. The Etruscan story also provides valuable lessons about cultural survival and adaptation that remain relevant in our interconnected modern world. Their example shows how civilizations can maintain their essential character while adapting to changing circumstances, and how cultural influences can persist even after political independence is lost. Understanding Etruscan civilization helps us appreciate the complex processes through which cultures interact, compete, and ultimately merge to create new synthetic traditions that preserve valuable elements from their diverse sources. The Roman absorption of Etruscan culture created something that was neither purely Roman nor purely Etruscan, but rather a new hybrid that combined the best elements of both traditions. The lasting influence of Etruscan civilization within Roman culture demonstrates how conquered peoples could achieve a form of victory through cultural persistence that transcended military defeat. While the Etruscans lost their political independence, their ideas and achievements became integral parts of the civilization that conquered them, ensuring their influence would spread throughout the ancient world. This pattern of cultural survival through absorption would be repeated throughout Roman expansion, as other conquered peoples contributed their own innovations and traditions to the evolving Roman synthesis. The Roman genius lay not just in military conquest, but in their ability to recognize and preserve valuable elements from the cultures they encountered. The Etruscan legacy within Roman civilization created foundations that would influence the development of European culture for centuries after the fall of Rome itself. Through Roman law, architecture, art, and social institutions, Etruscan innovations continued to shape human development long after their original creators had been forgotten by popular memory. Today's renewed interest in Etruscan civilization reflects growing appreciation for cultural diversity and alternative approaches to organizing human societies. As we face contemporary challenges that require creative solutions and adaptive responses, the Etruscan example provides inspiration and practical insights that remain relevant across the millennia. The remarkable story of the Etruscans demonstrates that historical influence cannot be measured solely through political success or military victory. Sometimes the greatest achievements of ancient civilizations lie in their ability to contribute lasting innovations that transcend their original contexts and continue to enrich human experience across generations. Here on Obscure Historiesa, we've discovered how a civilization that was virtually forgotten for over 1,000 years actually shaped the foundations of Western culture in ways that continue to influence our lives today. The Etruscan legacy reminds us that history's true victors aren't always those who win the final battle, but those whose ideas and achievements prove too valuable to be lost. The question of how Etruscan civilization ultimately met its end brings us to one of the most dramatic and mysterious periods in ancient Mediterranean history. The late Bronze Age collapse that had devastated earlier civilizations seemed like ancient history by the time Etruscan cities reached their peak, yet the forces that would eventually overwhelm them were already gathering strength in ways that few contemporary observers could have predicted. The 4th and 3rd centuries BCE witnessed a perfect storm of challenges that tested Etruscan resilience in ways their civilization had never experienced before. Climate change brought devastating droughts that reduced agricultural productivity across central Italy, creating food shortages that strained the economic foundations of Etruscan prosperity. Archaeological evidence from this period shows clear signs of population decline in rural areas, as farming communities struggled to maintain subsistence levels during extended periods of reduced rainfall. These environmental pressures coincided with increasing military threats from multiple directions that stretched Etruscan defensive capabilities beyond their limits. Celtic tribes from the north launched increasingly aggressive raids into Etruscan territory, seeking the wealth and fertile lands that had made these cities famous throughout the ancient world. Unlike earlier barbarian incursions that had been relatively limited in scope, these Celtic invasions involved entire populations seeking permanent settlement in regions previously controlled by Etruscan cities. The Gallic sack of Rome in 390 BCE demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most powerful cities to these northern invaders, creating panic throughout central Italy as urban populations realized that their walls and armies might not provide adequate protection against determined barbarian assault. Etruscan cities that had previously felt secure behind their fortifications suddenly found themselves preparing for sieges that could determine their very survival. Simultaneously, Roman expansion was accelerating in ways that created existential threats to Etruscan independence throughout their traditional territories. The systematic Roman approach to territorial conquest had evolved beyond simple military campaigns into comprehensive strategies for political, economic, and cultural transformation that left no room for meaningful autonomy among conquered peoples. Roman colonial policies were designed not just to control territory, but to eliminate the possibility of future resistance through complete integration of conquered populations into Roman administrative systems. The demographic pressures facing Etruscan cities during this period were particularly severe because their prosperity had always depended on maintaining delicate balances between urban and rural populations. The sophisticated crafts and manufacturing that had made Etruscan cities wealthy required substantial numbers of skilled workers concentrated in urban centres. But these populations depended on agricultural surpluses from surrounding countryside to feed themselves and maintain their specialised economic activities. Climate-induced agricultural failures disrupted these economic relationships in ways that undermined the entire foundation of Etruscan urban civilization. Rural populations that could no longer produce adequate food surpluses began migrating towards cities seeking alternative sources of subsistence. But urban economies that depended on agricultural prosperity lacked the resources to absorb these displaced populations. The result was social instability that weakened Etruscan cities precisely when they most needed unity to face external military threats. The response of individual Etruscan cities to these mounting pressures revealed both the strengths and fatal weaknesses of their federal political system. Cities with strong leadership and adequate resources could implement effective defensive measures, negotiate favourable agreements with potential allies, and adapt their economies to changing circumstances. However, the lack of centralised coordination meant that successful responses by individual cities couldn't be systematically shared or supported throughout the Etruscan world. Some cities attempted to address their security concerns through alliance relationships with Rome, calculating that cooperation with this rising power offered better prospects for survival than futile resistance. These pragmatic accommodations often provided short-term security and economic benefits, but they also accelerated the process of Roman cultural and political penetration that would eventually eliminate meaningful Etruscan autonomy. Other cities chose confrontation, either through direct military resistance or by supporting Rome's enemies in hopes of containing Roman expansion before it became unstoppable. These strategies occasionally achieved tactical successes that demonstrated continuing Etruscan military capabilities, but they also provoked Roman retaliation that could devastate entire regions and eliminate cities as effective political entities. The famous siege of Volsini in 264 BCE illustrates how internal social tensions combined with external military pressure to destroy even powerful Etruscan cities. Archaeological evidence suggests that this city had been struggling with conflicts between traditional aristocratic families and rising merchant classes who demanded greater political representation. When these internal disputes escalated into violence, Roman intervention provided the excuse for military occupation that eliminated Volsini's independence entirely. The destruction of Volsinii sent shockwaves throughout the remaining independent Etruscan cities, demonstrating that Roman power had reached levels where they could eliminate major urban centres with relative impunity. The psychological impact of this victory may have been even more significant than its immediate military consequences, convincing many Etruscan leaders that accommodation, rather than resistance, offered their only hope for survival. The gradual transformation of Etruscan cities from independent political entities into Roman administrative centres occurred through processes that were often more subtle than outright military conquest. Roman economic policies created dependencies that made independence increasingly impractical, even for cities that retained nominal autonomy. Access to Roman markets became essential for Etruscan merchants and craftsmen, while Roman legal systems provided frameworks for resolving disputes that gradually displaced traditional Etruscan institutions. Young Etruscans from prominent families found that careers within Roman administrative and military systems offered opportunities for advancement that exceeded what was available within their traditional societies. This brain drain weakened Etruscan institutions while strengthening Roman control over territories that remained technically independent. Over time, the distinction between Roman and Etruscan identity became increasingly meaningless for practical purposes. The linguistic transformation that accompanied political absorption demonstrates how thoroughly Roman influence penetrated Etruscan society during this transitional period. Latin became the language of commerce, administration, and higher education throughout former Etruscan territories, while Etruscan survived primarily in domestic contexts and religious ceremonies. This linguistic shift accelerated cultural assimilation while preserving certain elements of Etruscan tradition within increasingly Romanized communities. Religious syncretism during this period created fascinating hybrid traditions that combined Roman and Etruscan spiritual practices in ways that satisfied both cultural groups while facilitating political integration. Etruscan religious specialists continued to practice their traditional divination techniques, but increasingly within Roman institutional frameworks that channeled their expertise toward Roman political objectives. This religious synthesis preserved important elements of Etruscan culture while serving Roman administrative needs. The archaeological record from this transitional period reveals material culture that reflects the complex process of cultural transformation occurring within former Etruscan territories. Burial practices show gradual adoption of Roman customs alongside maintenance of traditional Etruscan elements, creating hybrid funeral traditions that honored both cultural heritages. Architectural styles evolved to incorporate Roman engineering techniques, while preserving decorative elements that maintained connections to Etruscan artistic traditions. Urban planning in cities that survived the transition to Roman rule demonstrates how Roman administrative requirements could be accommodated while preserving essential elements of traditional Etruscan urban organization. Street layouts were modified to facilitate Roman military and commercial activities, but sacred spaces and ceremonial areas often retained their traditional functions within new political contexts. The economic transformation of former Etruscan territories under Roman rule created both opportunities and challenges for local populations. Roman investment in infrastructure improvements like roads, aqueducts, and port facilities enhanced economic productivity while serving Roman strategic interests. These improvements often generated prosperity that exceeded what had been achieved during Etruscan independence, creating practical incentives for accepting Roman rule. However, the integration of local economies into Roman commercial networks also created vulnerabilities that hadn't existed during Etruscan independence. Economic decisions made in distant parts of the Roman world could have profound impacts on local communities that had little influence over policies affecting their welfare. This economic dependence reinforced political subordination while providing benefits that made resistance seem impractical. The preservation of Etruscan artistic and craft traditions within Roman cultural contexts demonstrates how imperial systems could maintain valuable elements of conquered cultures while redirecting them toward imperial purposes. Etruscan craftsmen found new markets for their products throughout the Roman world, but their work increasingly reflected Roman aesthetic preferences and served Roman political and religious functions. Educational opportunities available to Etruscans within the Roman system facilitated cultural transmission while accelerating assimilation processes. Young Etruscans could receive Roman educations that prepared them for successful careers, but this education also instilled Roman values and loyalties that gradually displaced traditional Etruscan cultural identities. The result was generations of individuals who maintained certain Etruscan cultural elements while identifying primarily as Romans. The military integration of former Etruscan populations into Roman forces demonstrates how imperial systems could utilize the expertise of conquered peoples while preventing the formation of distinct ethnic military units that might become focal points for rebellion. Etruscan military knowledge was preserved and transmitted within Roman institutional contexts that channeled this expertise toward Roman strategic objectives. Marriage policies that encouraged unions between Roman and Etruscan families accelerated the integration process while creating kinship networks that crossed ethnic boundaries. These intermarriages produced children whose identities combined elements from both cultural traditions, creating hybrid forms that facilitated the gradual merger of distinct populations into unified Roman communities. The administrative integration of former Etruscan territories into Roman governmental systems required careful balancing of efficiency with local sensitivities. Roman administrators needed to maintain effective control while avoiding policies that might provoke resistance from populations who retained emotional attachments to their traditional cultural identities. The success of this integration process demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how to manage cultural diversity within unified political systems. The legal frameworks developed for governing former Etruscan populations became models that would be applied throughout Roman expansion in other regions. Different categories of citizenship provided pathways for integration while maintaining Roman control over key political and military functions. These flexible arrangements encourage cooperation while discouraging resistance through practical incentives rather than simple coercion. The cultural policies adopted toward Etruscan populations revealed Roman understanding of how to preserve valuable elements of conquered cultures while achieving political objectives. Rather than attempting to eliminate Etruscan traditions entirely, Roman administrators allowed continuation of practices that didn't threaten Roman authority, while gradually promoting adoption of Roman customs and values. The success of Roman integration policies toward Etruscan populations created precedents that would influence imperial expansion throughout the Mediterranean world. The techniques developed for managing Etruscan cultural assimilation were refined and applied to other conquered peoples, creating systematic approaches to imperial administration that balanced efficiency with local adaptation. The gradual disappearance of distinct Etruscan political identity was accomplished without the massive violence or cultural destruction that characterized many ancient conquests. This relatively peaceful transformation demonstrates how imperial expansion could achieve lasting results through patient policy implementation rather than simply through military force. The Roman approach to Etruscan integration created loyalties that proved remarkably durable throughout subsequent centuries. The economic prosperity that many former Etruscan communities experienced under Roman rule provided practical validation for policies that might otherwise have seemed like cultural oppression. When integration produced tangible improvements in living standards and opportunities, resistance became difficult to justify or sustain among populations who benefited from Roman policies. The technological continuity that characterized the transition from Etruscan to Roman control demonstrates how imperial systems could preserve and expand upon conquered civilizations' achievements while serving imperial interests. Etruscan engineering expertise was maintained and enhanced within Roman institutional contexts that provided resources for technological development exceeding what had been available during Etruscan independence. The artistic legacy of Etruscan civilization within Roman culture ensured that their creative achievements would survive and influence artistic development throughout the Roman world. Etruscan aesthetic approaches became integral parts of Roman artistic traditions that would eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean, creating cultural influences that transcended their original political contexts. The religious influences that Etruscan traditions exerted on Roman spiritual practices created lasting elements within Roman religion that persisted throughout the empire's entire history. Etruscan concepts about divination, religious ceremony, and spiritual authority became fundamental aspects of Roman religious life that connected Roman political institutions with divine sanction. The linguistic legacy of Etruscan civilization within Latin preserved elements of their language within the vocabulary and structure of what would become the foundation for Romance languages throughout Europe. While Etruscan itself disappeared as a spoken language, Its influences within Latin ensured that traces of Etruscan linguistic heritage would survive in languages spoken by millions of people today. The social innovations that Etruscan civilization had developed, particularly regarding women's rights and family organization, influenced Roman social development in ways that distinguished Roman practices from those of neighboring civilizations. These social influences created more egalitarian elements within Roman society that would have lasting impacts on Western cultural development. The commercial expertise that Etruscan merchants and craftsmen had developed over centuries of Mediterranean trade became integral parts of Roman economic systems that would eventually dominate ancient commerce. Etruscan commercial knowledge helped create the economic foundations that supported Roman expansion, while ensuring that valuable business practices would be preserved and transmitted to future generations. The diplomatic traditions that Etruscan cities had developed for managing relationships with diverse neighbours provided models that Roman administrators adapted for governing their expanding empire. Etruscan approaches to cultural accommodation and political flexibility influenced Roman policies that successfully integrated diverse populations into unified imperial systems. The urban planning expertise that Etruscan cities had developed through centuries of sophisticated city construction influenced Roman approaches to creating and managing urban centres throughout their empire. Etruscan innovations in infrastructure, public spaces, and residential organisation became standard elements in Roman urban design that would shape city development throughout the ancient world. The agricultural knowledge that Etruscan farmers had accumulated through generations of cultivation in central Italian conditions was preserved and transmitted within Roman agricultural systems that would feed the empire's growing population. Etruscan farming techniques contributed to the agricultural productivity that supported Roman expansion while ensuring food security for urban populations. The manufacturing expertise that Etruscan craftsmen had developed in areas like metallurgy, ceramics, and textile production became integral parts of Roman industrial capabilities that supplied both military and civilian needs throughout the empire. Etruscan technical knowledge helped create the manufacturing base that supported Roman economic dominance while preserving valuable craft traditions. The educational traditions that Etruscan societies had developed for transmitting cultural knowledge influenced Roman approaches to training young people for adult responsibilities. Etruscan educational methods contributed to Roman systems that produced the administrators, soldiers, and professionals needed to manage an expanding empire while maintaining cultural continuity across generations. The medical knowledge that Etruscan practitioners had accumulated through centuries of healing experience was integrated into Roman medical systems that would serve populations throughout the Mediterranean world. Etruscan medical expertise contributed to Roman healthcare capabilities while ensuring that valuable therapeutic knowledge would be preserved and transmitted to future medical practitioners. The architectural innovations that Etruscan builders had developed through generations of construction experience influenced Roman building practices that would create some of the most impressive structures in the ancient world. Etruscan architectural knowledge contributed to Roman engineering capabilities while preserving design elements that would influence Western architectural development for centuries. The story of how Etruscan civilization was absorbed into the Roman world demonstrates that historical influence cannot be measured solely through political survival or military victory. While the Etruscans lost their independence, their ideas, techniques, and cultural innovations became integral parts of the civilization that conquered them, ensuring their influence would spread throughout the ancient world and persist long after their political identity had disappeared. This pattern of cultural survival through absorption would characterize Roman expansion throughout the Mediterranean as other conquered peoples contributed their own innovations and traditions to the evolving Roman synthesis. The Roman genius lay not just in military conquest, but in their ability to recognize and preserve valuable elements from the cultures they encountered, creating a comprehensive civilization that incorporated the best achievements of all the peoples they ruled. The rediscovery of Etruscan civilization during the Renaissance created new appreciation for achievements that had been forgotten or misunderstood for over a millennium. Renaissance scholars and artists were fascinated by Etruscan works that offered alternatives to Greek and Roman traditions, providing fresh perspectives on classical themes that had seemed exhausted through centuries of imitation. Archaeological investigations beginning in the 18th century gradually revealed the true scope and sophistication of Etruscan achievements, challenging earlier assumptions about ancient Italian civilization that had focused almost exclusively on Roman accomplishments. The discovery of spectacular tomb paintings, elaborate metalwork, and sophisticated urban sites demonstrated that pre-Roman Italy had produced civilizations of remarkable complexity and artistic excellence. Modern scientific techniques continue to revolutionize our understanding of Etruscan civilization by providing tools for analyzing materials, dating artifacts, and reconstructing ancient environments that earlier generations of scholars couldn't access. Each new discovery adds pieces to the puzzle of how this remarkable society created lasting contributions to human civilization while adapting to changing circumstances that ultimately led to their political absorption into the Roman world. Here on Obscure Historiesa, we've traced the remarkable journey of a civilization that shaped the foundations of Western culture in ways that continue to influence our lives today, even though their political independence was lost over 2,000 years ago. The Etruscan legacy reminds us that history's true victors aren't always those who win the final battle, but those whose innovations and achievements prove too valuable to be forgotten, surviving through their contributions to the cultures that followed them. The enduring influence of Etruscan civilization demonstrates how cultural achievements can transcend political boundaries and historical periods, creating legacies that enrich human experience across generations. Their story shows us that even when civilizations face overwhelming challenges that threaten their survival, their most valuable contributions can find ways to persist and continue shaping human development in ways their creators never could have imagined. The question of who the Etruscans truly were becomes even more fascinating when we consider how their unique approach to death and the afterlife reveals fundamental aspects of their worldview that set them apart from every other ancient civilization. While most ancient peoples viewed death with fear and trepidation, the Etruscans embraced it as a continuation of life's greatest pleasures, creating elaborate underground cities for the dead that rival anything built for the living. Walking through the necropolis at Cerveteri today, you're not exploring a grim cemetery, but rather a vibrant ancient neighborhood where families continued to gather, feast, and celebrate long after death had claimed their loved ones. These weren't simple burial sites, but carefully planned communities complete with streets, piazzas, and family districts that mirror the organization of Etruscan cities above ground. The tomb architecture itself tells us everything we need to know about Etruscan attitudes toward mortality and family continuity. These underground chambers were designed as eternal homes, complete with multiple rooms for different family activities, elaborate furnishings carved directly from bedrock, and ceiling decorations that recreate the wooden beam construction of actual houses. The message was unmistakable. Death was simply a change of residence, not an end to family life. What makes these burial practices particularly remarkable is how they reveal the Etruscan concept of extended family relationships that stretched across generations and beyond death itself. Tomb inscriptions frequently record not just the deceased individual, but their entire genealogical network, creating family trees that connect the living with ancestors who remained active participants in family affairs through religious ceremonies and regular visits to their underground residences. The famous Tomb of the Reliefs at Cerveteri demonstrates this concept perfectly, featuring carved representations of household objects, tools, weapons, and personal belongings arranged throughout the burial chamber, as if the deceased family members might need them at any moment. Cooking utensils hang from walls, armor stands ready for use, and gaming pieces wait for players who will join eternal competitions in the afterlife. These burial practices also reveal the sophisticated Etruscan understanding of social relationships that transcended individual mortality. Married couples were frequently buried together in elaborate sarcophagi that show them reclining side by side, sharing eternal banquets in poses that emphasize companionship and mutual affection. The famous sarcophagus of the spouses from Cerveteri captures this beautifully, with the couple gazing into each other's eyes with expressions of contentment and joy that suggest death has not diminished their relationship, but rather perfected it. The preservation of these burial sites provides us with unparalleled insights into Etruscan daily life, precisely because they were designed to recreate the conditions of living for deceased family members. The objects placed in tombs weren't just grave goods intended to impress visitors, but functional items that reflected actual Etruscan lifestyles, preferences, and social relationships. Wealthy Etruscan tombs contain imported luxury goods from across the Mediterranean world, demonstrating the international connections that brought exotic materials to central Italian cities. Greek pottery, Egyptian jewelry, Celtic metalwork, and Phoenician glass all appear in Etruscan burial contexts, revealing trade networks that connected local communities with distant cultures, and creating cosmopolitan tastes that influenced Etruscan artistic development. But it's not just the expensive imports that make these tombs fascinating. Everyday objects like cooking pots, storage jars, personal ornaments, and household tools provide intimate glimpses into how ordinary Etruscans actually lived, worked, and organized their daily routines. These mundane artifacts often prove more revealing than spectacular artistic masterpieces, because they show us the practical realities of Etruscan existence rather than idealized representations. The social hierarchies within Etruscan society become clearly visible through comparative analysis of different tomb types and their contents. Wealthy families constructed elaborate underground palaces, complete with multiple chambers, sophisticated architectural details, and vast quantities of luxury goods that demonstrated their economic success and social prominence. Middle-class families created more modest but still comfortable burial spaces that reflected their prosperity without the ostentatious display of aristocratic tombs. Even relatively humble burials reveal the broad distribution of prosperity that characterized Etruscan society at its peak. Simple chamber tombs of ordinary citizens contain imported pottery, bronze objects, and personal ornaments that indicate participation in the commercial networks and cultural developments that made Etruscan civilization distinctive. This archaeological evidence supports the conclusion that Etruscan prosperity extended well beyond a tiny elite to include substantial middle-class populations. The religious dimensions of Etruscan burial practices reveal their sophisticated theological concepts about the relationship between divine and human realms. Tomb paintings frequently depict religious ceremonies, divine figures, and mythological scenes that provide insights into Etruscan spiritual beliefs that aren't preserved in any written theological texts. These artistic programs weren't just decoration, but rather instructional materials that guided deceased souls through the complex spiritual landscape of the afterlife. The famous Tomb of the Augurs contains frescoes showing religious officials conducting divination ceremonies that reveal the central role of spiritual consultation in Etruscan decision-making processes. The detailed depiction of augural procedures provides visual documentation of practices that influenced Roman religious traditions, while demonstrating the sophisticated ritual knowledge that Etruscan priests possessed. Mythological scenes in tomb paintings often combine Greek narrative elements with distinctly Etruscan interpretations that create hybrid stories reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of Etruscan culture. The Tomb of the Bulls features complex mythological narratives that blend familiar Greek themes with local traditions and beliefs, creating uniquely Etruscan versions of Mediterranean mythological traditions. These artistic programs also reveal Etruscan attitudes toward heroism, morality, and personal achievement that differed significantly from contemporary Greek and Roman values. Etruscan heroes are often shown in domestic contexts or peaceful activities, rather than military exploits, suggesting cultural values that emphasize prosperity, family harmony, and artistic achievement over conquest and domination. The musical and entertainment traditions depicted in tomb paintings provide fascinating insights into Etruscan cultural life that complement the material evidence found in burial contexts. Musicians appear throughout Etruscan funerary art, playing instruments, leading processions, and providing entertainment for eternal banquets that continue in the afterlife. The variety of instruments represented suggests rich musical traditions that incorporated influences from across the Mediterranean while maintaining distinctive Etruscan characteristics. Dancing scenes in tomb paintings capture the energy and joy that characterized Etruscan social celebrations, showing figures moving with fluid grace that suggests these artists observed actual performers and captured not just their poses, but the essence of their movement. The emotional expressiveness of these dancers provides evidence for Etruscan cultural values that celebrated life's pleasures and encouraged artistic expression as forms of spiritual devotion. Athletic competitions depicted in tomb art reveal the importance of physical culture in Etruscan society, while demonstrating their adaptation of Greek sporting traditions to serve Etruscan social and religious purposes. Wrestling matches, boxing contests, and foot races appear throughout Etruscan funerary art, but they're often shown in religious contexts that suggest these activities serve spiritual as well as entertainment functions. The integration of entertainment and religious observance that characterizes these tomb paintings reflects broader Etruscan approaches to spiritual life that saw no contradiction between pleasure and piety. Their festivals combined religious ceremonies with music, dancing, feasting, and athletic competitions in ways that created comprehensive community celebrations, serving multiple social functions simultaneously. The technological sophistication required to create these elaborate underground burial complexes demonstrates Etruscan engineering capabilities that equaled anything achieved in their cities above ground. The precision of rock-cut architecture, the complexity of drainage systems that kept tombs dry over centuries, and the structural engineering that created stable underground spaces reveal advanced technical knowledge that influenced later Roman construction techniques. Ventilation systems in larger tomb complexes show sophisticated understanding of air circulation principles that maintained proper atmospheric conditions for preserving both human remains and grave goods over extended periods. These engineering solutions required mathematical calculations and practical expertise that demonstrate the high level of technical education available within Etruscan society. So there you have it, the remarkable story of the Etruscans, a civilization that was hiding in plain sight for over a millennium, yet shaped the very foundations of Western culture in ways we're only now beginning to fully understand. From their indigenous origins in central Italy, to their sophisticated urban societies, from their revolutionary treatment of women, to their technological innovations that would influence Roman engineering for centuries, the Etruscans created a legacy that transcended their political absorption into the Roman world. What makes their story so compelling isn't just their impressive achievements in art, technology, and governance, but how they managed to achieve a form of cultural immortality even after losing their independence. Through Roman expansion, Etruscan innovations in metallurgy, architecture, religious practice, and social organization spread throughout the Mediterranean world, creating influences that would shape European civilization long after their original creators had been forgotten. The Etruscan example reminds us that history's greatest victors aren't always those who win the final battle, but those whose ideas and innovations prove too valuable to disappear. Their story demonstrates how civilizations can survive through cultural transmission, adapting and evolving within new political contexts, while preserving the essential elements that made them unique.